A quorum, I call the meeting to order. Apologies have been received from Deputy Stephen Matthews. Propose we now go into public session. The purpose of the meeting today is for the Joint Committee to discuss the Committee's consideration of Ireland's national aviation policy, which we are undergoing at the moment. We are joined by Mr. Michael O'Leary, Group CEO of Ryanair, and Mr. Eddie Wilson, CEO of Ryanair. You're both most welcome. Note on privilege. Witnesses are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable, or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damage to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to a different person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks. It is imperative that you comply with any such direction. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the houses or an official either by name as such as a way to make him or her identifiable. I would like to remind members of the constitutional requirements that members must be physically present within the confines of the Leinster House complex in order to participate in public meetings. Reluctantly, I will not permit a member to participate where they are not adhering to this constitutional requirement. Therefore, any member who attempts to participate from outside the precincts will be reluctantly asked to leave the meeting. In this regard, I would ask any member partaking via MS Teams that prior to making their contribution to the meeting that you confirm the undergoings of the Leinster House campus. And if attending the committee room, you are asked to exercise personal responsibility to protect yourself and others from the risk of contact to COVID-19. And I want to thank Mr. O'Leary and Mr. Wilson for coming in before us. Really looking forward to a very constructive engagement about really the direction of national aviation policy. You're probably aware, Mr. O'Leary and Mr. Wilson, that we're calling for the National Aviation Policy Review to get underway. There is a regional review will commence shortly in terms of regional airports, but it's something that we as a committee collectively feel very strongly about. So we really are looking forward to your, I suppose, unique insights into the aviation sector, more particularly with what you do in Ryanair. So, Mr. Leary, I'd ask you to make your opening statement.
Okay, thank you, Cathaoirleach, and good afternoon, members of the committee. As I said, we're joined by Eddie Wilson, who's the Ryanair DAC CEO. I'm the Ryanair Group CEO. I thought rather than reading a long-winded statement, it would be easier and assist the discussion to just take you through a couple of quick slides on what we're doing at the moment in Ryanair, what we're doing in Ireland, and our concerns about the state of currently our national aviation policy. So with your agreement, yes. There's only about 8 slides and we'll go through it reasonably quickly. So the first slide, quick summary of where Ryanair finds itself at the end of 2022, which is in a strong period of recovery from the existential crisis of COVID, or that COVID visit on our industry. We remain, as we emerge out of COVID, by some considerable distance, the lowest fare, lowest cost EU airline. We are seeing a very strong recovery in traffic this year. We're on track. Our year end is March, but it looks like we'll carry about 168 million passengers. That's up 13% on our pre-COVID traffic. We're happy to report that our customer service metrics are at all-time highs, mainly because of good reliability and excellent onboard service delivered by our crews. We are investing heavily and significantly upgrading our environmental rating. Carbon Disclosure Project now rate Ryanair a B, which is an industry-leading environmental rating for a European airline. We expect that to rise to an A in the next 12 months as we invest heavily in new aircraft that are much more fuel efficient. We're also the #1 EU airline for environmental and social governance. I'm pleased to say after the trauma of COVID, we emerge out of Ryanair, out of COVID with a very strong balance sheet, which has enabled us to make brave decisions about recruiting people during COVID, continue to acquire new aircraft, which allows us uniquely in Europe to grow very significantly over the next 4 or 5 years. And we're very keen that a significant proportion of that growth would be allocated here in Ireland. Next slide.
And maybe, Mr. O'Leary, as you're going through it, you might reference back to your opening statement just to link in this presentation with the opening statement, and then that covers the opening statement itself, which is obviously a document we have to publish.
Great. So where we are this autumn, we're operating from 88 bases. A base is an airport across Europe where we base aircraft cabin crew, engineers and pilots overnight, live there. We serve 234 airports across 37 countries. The fleet this winter is at 517 aircraft, and that will rise to almost 700 aircraft over the next 5 years. We're operating over 2,500 routes with 3,000 daily flights. And I think what's important in all of this, the next slide, is if you look at the existential trauma of COVID. So prior to COVID, which is March FY20, we carried 149 million passengers. If it hadn't been for COVID, that would have been 150 million. In FY21, that collapsed, and we've never seen a collapse like that before. We've been through the Gulf War, 9/11, Icelandic volcanoes. At worst, our fleet was grounded for 2 or 3 days. We've been grounded for 18 months, as has the whole industry, so we weren't unique. But that's the challenge that faces us, and it's also the challenge that faces Ireland as a transport and tourism destination, which lives on the very peripheral edge of Europe. So we collapsed to 27 million passengers in March 21. We recovered some, or a significant proportion of that, to March 22. 97 million passengers. It would have been more, but for Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, which collapsed traffic in February, March and into Easter of 2022. But since that, this summer, we have recovered very strongly. In fact, we lead Europe's recovery. We're the only major airline across Europe that has restored all of its pre-COVID capacity and then some. We're on track to grow to 168 million passengers this year. But over the next 4 years, as we set out in our submission, we expect to grow by another 60 million passengers a year. And we want to put up to 25% or 15 million of that additional capacity here in Ireland if the environmental and the costs the environmental policies and cost policies are favourable towards continuing to stimulate growth to and from peripheral EU member states such as Ireland. And that is, I think, where we need to focus Irish aviation policy. That takes me neatly on to current aviation. Our concern about aviation policy is it hasn't been upgraded now since 2019. I know the committee is focusing on it, and it is timely and opportune. But it is remarkable that the current government policy hasn't been updated. The last report, and there's a copy of the cover document here, which is the second progress report, which is dated February 2019. And it sets out clearly that Ireland's aviation policy is to enhance Ireland's connectivity by ensuring safe, secure and competitive access responsive to the needs of business, tourism and consumers. And we find it, next slide, really quite shocking that that policy hasn't been updated, particularly given the traumatic and existential crises that Irish aviation has suffered over the last 3 years. The policy hasn't been updated under the current government, which since February 2019, the current government, I think, took power in 2020. It is remarkable that that policy hasn't been updated to take account of the damage caused by COVID to Ireland's connectivity, the Ukraine and the ongoing threat to Irish connectivity and air aviation from the illegal invasion of Ukraine, or the likely impact of the current recession on air travel to and from Ireland. We are concerned that in that vacuum of our absence of an aviation policy, the Dublin Airport monopoly has returned to some of its bad habits. It currently proposes to waste €200 million building a tunnel under a taxiway that is absolutely unnecessary at Dublin Airport, that no airline needs and certainly doesn't serve any customer. We're back to gold plating or wasting expenditure here so they can inflate the regulated charges at the airport. We do need, and I think we would ask this committee respectfully to take account of how Europe's environmental policy is damaging the connectivity of peripheral states. Let me start by saying Ryanair believes all passengers should pay an environmental charge. We do have a damaging impact on the environment. Flying does have a damaging impact on the environment, but those charges must be fair and they should be balanced and fairly distributed across all airline passengers in Europe. Currently, they're not, and I'll show you the detail why. European air traffic system is a shambles, and we saw that last summer. It accounts for about 90% of all of Ryanair's flight delays, and certainly about 20% of our fuel consumption and emissions. The prize of getting some effective reform of European ATC, particularly for a peripheral country like Ireland, would be significant reduction in fuel costs, significant reduction in access prices for consumers, and a significant improvement in our reductions in emissions.
An ATC for people looking in.
Air traffic control, the European air traffic control system. We are concerned that the government, at the recent Sharm el-Sheikh conference, one of the solutions being proposed is to call for even more levies on aviation, which will directly damage the competitiveness and connectivity of Ireland and access cost to Ireland. And we would make the point, and I think it's important, while we accept that aviation must pay its fair share, aviation is not the cause of climate change or global warming. Aviation, if you go to the next slide, accounts for just over 2.8% of Europe's CO2 emissions. Marine transport accounts for over 5%. And yet we never hear people talking when, the Sky News wants to show global warming. It's always an aircraft taking off and you can see the contrails. It's never a ferry putting out of some harbour because you can't see anything warming up. So aviation does have a damaging impact on our environment. Aviation must pay its fair share, but aviation shouldn't be asked to carry an unfair share, and particularly when it is asked to carry an unfair share, peripheral countries such as Ireland get very badly damaged. Next slide. This is a very interesting slide. I'd like to explain it. It is the amount of flights undertaken, or the airline emissions on the left-hand side. It's the airline emissions created by each of the major airline groups across Europe: Lufthansa, British Airways, Air France, Ryanair, KLM, etc. The blue element of the bar is the amount of those emissions that actually where the passengers pay a carbon price or carbon tax. And you will see that Ryanair, and to a lesser extent EasyJet UK in the UK, stand out by having over 80-90% of our passengers pay an environmental, or a carbon price associated, or environmental taxes on their flights. The reason the other airlines don't is because of the extraordinary environmental tax exemptions that are being approved by Brussels, largely at the behest of lobbying from the major legacy airlines. The most polluting flights to and from Europe are long-haul flights. Long-haul flights to Europe account for 54% of Europe's aviation CO2 emissions, 54%, but deliver 6% to the passengers, and they're exempt from any environmental taxation whatsoever. So the richest people, the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, flying long-haul flights to and from Europe, make no contribution whatsoever. And the legacy airlines have very cleverly lobbied Brussels to also give them an exemption for transfer traffic. So the Dutch, for example, Commissioner Tillerman, who's a great advocate for further environmental taxes on everything, and the Dutch are, have lots of other alternatives if they want to move to and from Holland, advocates that aviation should pay their environmental taxes. Yet his government have designed an environmental tax system in Holland, which is penal, but it exempts all the transfer traffic at Schiphol, which currently accounts for 84% of KLM's traffic. So only 16% of KLM's traffic is point-to-point traffic at Schiphol. That's all that pays the environmental taxes. Yet they damage competition by saying Ryanair and EasyJet and others who just fly point-to-point, you pay all the taxes. And I think it is fundamental to the competitiveness, particularly of not just Ireland, but the peripheral states, and we've had some success with the other European governments in Portugal, Spain, Italy, Malta, Cyprus, Greece, are beginning to push back on this, because I think they accept the point we're making. It is grossly inequitable that poor Irish passengers or poor price-sensitive passengers travelling to the peripheral countries of Europe pay an inequitable burden of environmental taxes, where the richest people on long-haul flights are the people causing the most environmental damage. Those taking 2 flights to get to their destination instead of 1 are exempt. And this needs to be challenged in we would respectfully call for in Ireland's Ireland's new aviation policy. Next slide. Ireland continues to lead short-haul in Europe. Ryanair is Europe's greenest, cleanest major airline, yet our passengers pay a disproportionate proportion of environmental taxes. There is this myth perpetrated by some on the environmental lobby that aviation doesn't pay tax on fuel. It doesn't, mainly because actually it's flexible. It can pick up tax at different countries, and they've not yet designed a way of taxing fuel. But last year, Ryanair passengers paid 640 million of in 2019 pre-COVID, in environmental taxes, APD, ETS, and all the others. And that's equivalent to an environmental tax of €4.50 per passenger on an average fare of €40. So Ryanair passengers are paying about 12% VAT, if you like, on our ticket prices in environmental taxes. Now, we ask what happens to this money. We'll deal with that as a separate issue. But Europe's most polluting flights, which is long-haul flights and transfer traffic, are entirely exempt. Short-haul peripheral airlines and our passengers pay 100% of Europe's environmental taxes. Ryanair this year, or the next 5 years, is investing $22 billion. That's $22 billion in new aircraft. And these aircraft offer us 4% more seats. It's 197 seats instead of 189. But they burn 16% less fuel, and they reduce our noise emissions by 40%. So people ask me, what are you doing about the environment? We are investing huge quantities of money to buy new technology aircraft that are transformative in terms of reducing fuel consumption and reducing noise emissions. We've also set out the most ambitious environmental targets in Europe. We are committed to trying to get to 12.5% of our fuel being sustainable aviation fuels by 2030. We've already signed up 2 SAF supply deals with Neste in Holland and OMV in Austria. We hope to sign another one with Shell tomorrow at an environmental conference we're hosting in Trinity. And we're committed to being net carbon neutral by 2050. We are very concerned about what is happening to our environmental taxes. Again, Ireland receives approximately €140 million in ETS revenues directly from our passengers, routed through them. Ireland commits that money will be spent on environmental measures and climate reduction, achieving climate reduction targets. And as I've enclosed some correspondence with the Department of Transport, over 70% of this money is being squandered on the school bus fleet, which is neither environmentally friendly nor particularly fuel efficient. What we find remarkable is that it was spent on the school bus fleet during 2 years in 2019 and 2020 when the school bus fleet wasn't even operating. The schools were closed because of COVID. Now, we don't begrudge, we fully accept that children have to get to school, but that should be a Department of Education budget. If the Department of Transport or Irish government is receiving these environmental tax revenues from Ryanair passengers, we would ask that it be spent on environmental measures such as producing or procuring more sustainable aviation fuels at Irish airports, or better still, helping us to subsidise the very significant investments we're making in new technology aircraft. We're also about to spend, we've just committed to spend over $200 million on scimitar winglets, which will reduce fuel consumption on our aircraft by 1.5% over the next 5 years. And yet, in this market where astonishing volumes of environmental revenues are being squandered on the school bus fleet or on unidentified climate finance projects, the government is now proposing new levies on short-haul passengers that will further damage Ireland and our competitiveness. Next slide. We would like to discuss today with the committee what we believe should be included in a new aviation policy for Ireland. And at the centre of that policy should be an aggressive and imaginative growth plan, not just for Irish aviation, but also for the major airports across Ireland. Central to that plan is recognise that Ireland is a peripheral location in Europe. We either are efficient and low-cost attractive destination, or we will not be able to compete. We will lose capacity and we will lose visitors. 2, we need to drive down access costs in order to increase connectivity and tourism. That means we need lower cost, more efficient airports. We don't necessarily believe that airports should reduce their existing charges, but no money should be spent at an airport unless it allows the airport to offer lower charges for growth traffic. Not just growth traffic from Ryanair, but growth traffic from all the other airlines as well. And if Dublin Airport wants to spend 200 million building a tunnel under a taxiway, off you go, but that shouldn't finish up in the regulated asset base. We're calling out for Dublin Airport to extend the existing Pier D, or in other words, have additional terminal facilities up there, and the 200 million would be far better spent by the airport, extending Pier D up where on the north apron where the old hangars are. That's where the new runway is being built, and Dublin Airport would get more revenue from passengers and more retail revenue by extending there. Tunnels do not generate revenue for airports except in a regulated environment. We must have, and Ireland must be at the centre of demanding fair environmental taxes. Everybody in Europe should pay their fair share. Long-haul passengers who account for over 50% of Europe's CO2 emissions should pay their fair share. They're rich enough to be able to pay. The short-haul passengers, particularly those travelling to the peripheral countries, shouldn't be carrying all of the burden. And it is indefensible that transfer flights across expensive hub airports are exempt from environmental taxes. If you decide to choose to take 2 flights to get to your destination, you should pay twice the environmental charge that the short-haul direct passenger does. Ireland should be at the centre of calling for EU ATC reform. We have one of Ireland's great exports to Brussels has been Eamon Brennan, who's run Eurocontrol for the last 5 years and has met astonishing success in running Eurocontrol. Sadly, he's stepping down at the end of this year. But he has done much to improve air traffic control systems across Europe, but much more remains to be done. We compete, if you look at the two other main aviation economies, in America they have one air traffic control system across America, and the airlines don't even pay for it. It's paid by national government. Where's the other one? America, I forget the other one. Europe, we have, despite having a single marketplace, we have 47 different air traffic control systems that we have to fly through, zigzagging around all these so they can all get a little piece of the pie. We should be allowed to fly. The technology now exists to allow us to fly straight. We should be allowed to fly straight. We would burn less fuel. We would reduce our impact on the environment, and we would pass on enormous savings to our customers. And it is inexplicable. Europe should be protecting the free movement of people. French, when they go on strike, close down. We have to cancel all of the overflights across France when French air traffic control go on strike. The French government used minimum service legislation to protect local French domestic flights. So the French are all happily flying around the place, but it's the poor Irish, the Spanish, the Italians and the Germans who are taking all of the cancellations, and they think we said, we're sorry, your flight is cancelled because it's a French ATC strike. They think we're telling them lies. The sun is shining out there. It is bizarre that Europe's and the free movement of people across Europe in a single market is allowed to be threatened by the French every time they have these recreational strikes, which they have frequently in the summer. Sorry, it's not something we reform of European air traffic control would save about 20% of our fuel and would eliminate 90% of flight delays. If you put these measures at the heart of a new aviation policy for Ireland in the next 5 years, we believe that Irish traffic will grow by 50% over the next 5 years. And I'm going to ask Eddie just to take us through those numbers.
We've already, in terms of like Dublin, this year we've had our strongest summer ever, and we do react to lower airport charges, which came in as part of the TRSS scheme. Cork. We flew 3 aircraft out of Cork this year, 3 based aircraft, and we are hopeful that we are fairly advanced on a deal with Cork at the moment to continue that 3rd based aircraft into this summer. I'd be reasonably confident of that. In Shannon, we have now a 3 based aircraft in Shannon all year round. We've got a new hangar facility there with 3 bays. We're creating 200 jobs. Knock as well. We've no based aircraft, but a vital artery to the, particularly for UK regional airports into the west of Ireland. And we're going to do close to 700,000 passengers in there. And Kerry, again, which I was in recently, where we've got direct connections to Germany, Manchester and London, is a fantastic facility and should continue to grow. So that's where we are in terms of 2019, 2022. We would see ourselves growing if we have the type of aviation policy that Michael has outlined there, whereby we have competitive costs. We have to have competitive costs. I mean, I was in the Canary Islands last week with the president of the Canaries, and they have a conference there this week of all of the island economies. And Ireland isn't represented at that because they know what's coming for them in terms of, you have the ridiculous situation where a flight from Amsterdam to Aruba in the Dutch Antilles gets 0 in terms of taxes, but if you want to fly down to the Canary Islands, you'll have a €28 tax. And places like the Canary Islands, which are on the periphery, which, their tourism industry is their Ruhr Valley. That's it. If those people weren't working in tourism, they got to work somewhere else, and they will have a carbon footprint somewhere else. So it is imperative that we have an aviation policy that supports the type of growth that we could put into Ireland, and we could see that connectivity expand substantially. I mean, what we did this summer in Dublin Airport, we now have more short-haul connections. Ryanair has more short-haul connections out of Dublin than Heathrow Airport has short-haul connections throughout Europe. So we are We will be able to do that. We've got 50 aircraft coming this year, another 50 the year after, and we can grow Irish airports by 50% if it runs hand in hand with those the aviation policy that Ryanair has set out.
And we should just explain, those are total traffic numbers in 2019 at each of the individual airports, so 38 million passengers. We think 50% growth is possible over the next 5 years. We won't deliver all of it, but we will certainly deliver most of it. We believe we can grow our existing traffic at Dublin, Cork, Shannon, Knock and Kerry by 50%. Most of that growth will clearly take place in Dublin, where we have the benefit of a second runway, which, and credit where it's due to the DAA, was fortuitously built during a recession and during COVID. That was the right time to build a second runway. The challenge now, though, and the capacity restriction in Dublin is terminal capacity. So we need another low-cost terminal, a bit like Pier D, that runs to the north side of Pier D. When you go across that big the skyway out to Pier D, you need to build something up to the right there. You could build an equivalent of Pier D there, another 120 million. And none of that needs a tunnel under a taxiway. That will serve us nothing. Cork needs no additional infrastructure, it just needs lower access costs. And to be fair, again, and we should give credit where it's due, the management team at Cork Airport have been quite imaginative in coming up with growth incentives here. Shannon had been terrific since it was separated out from under the DAA. Mary Constantine and her team there have done a remarkable job. And Shannon is difficult. I mean, the biggest threat to traffic growth in Cork and Shannon is Dublin. The motorways, we used to do 3 flights a day from Dublin to Cork on a domestic, and the day they opened, either it was the Fermoy or the Mitchelstown bypass, the traffic went from a 90% load factor to 0. Everybody drives. But we still think so. But Cork is growing strongly with European traffic inbound into Cork in the summer and some charters outbound. Knock and Kerry are doing well-run airports, and we are working with them. But it's very difficult to drive additional growth, significant additional growth into Cork and Kerry, because we can't base aircraft there late at night. There isn't a demand for those services. So what we wanted to put here is, here's where we think aviation policy should be for Ireland. We need to set out that policy, we need to put it in writing, and we need to challenge our government and our industry. Fine. If we put in place incentives for growth, if we challenge Europe's lazy environmental taxation so that we're not penalising the peripheral countries, can you increase traffic by 50% over the next 5 years and create another 14,000 jobs? And the answer is yes, we can. And just one concluding slide. Again, and I don't want to make it the centre point of today. I would urge the committee just to investigate what is going on with the Department of the Environment on their ETS revenues. This is their own analysis of where the ETS revenues of 140 million over the last 3 years. The school transport bus Éireann is taking 77% of that money. That is not money being spent on environmental or climate projects. We wrote to the Department of Environment, and what they came back with, and I don't need to tell the people in this room who can read English, but when somebody's not answering a question, they use words like an amount equivalent to 100% of Ireland's ETS revenues has been attributed to emission reduction activities. Now, we know when people are speaking in French, and that is classic French. And we've also then wrote back and said, well, what is the climate finance money being spent on the 32 million, the 28 million, the 30 million? Can't get an answer. Please take our assurances that it is amounts equivalent to this have been attributed to emission reduction activities. We don't begrudge the school bus fleet the money, but it shouldn't come out of monies that Ireland is telling Europe we're going to spend on environmental measures. The aviation industry is challenged. We do need to work to come up with more sustainable supply of sustainable aviation fuels at our airports, and where we're investing heavily in winglets to reduce fuel consumption in new aircraft, we think it's not unreasonable that some of that investment would be supported with some income from these funds. That's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for listening to us.
We look forward to really constructive. You've really set out there what your views are, and we'll know the members. It's because there's so many looking to contribute. I'm going to have to stick strictly to 10 minutes. So people have 9 minutes, we'll have 1 minute. So that should give sufficient time. So first up, and did we deal with the issues as raised by Mr. O'Leary and Mr. Wilson here today? First up is Deputy Carl Crowe, and you have 10 minutes.
Thanks, Chairman. have a lot of questions I'd like to get across, so maybe I can be quick and if you can be quick as well, just like Ryanair style. You're always welcome here and very insightful. We didn't expect to get a thesis on school transportation, but I think that's something we need to look into further. Just want to ask you, first of all, you mentioned environmental policies, and our committee travelled to Amsterdam and Rotterdam there a couple of weeks ago just to look at how their national aviation policy is framed. They said to us in Rotterdam Airport, they said there's something massive, there's an elephant in the room you haven't yet grasped in Ireland, and these are all the environmental limits. They said we are at capacity. This isn't due to lack of runway or hangar space or floor space in the airport. We are at environmental capacity. And they said this is coming hot and heavy across Europe. The European Commission will want to replicate the Dutch model throughout all member states. What would you say to that? And it's something we haven't even spoken about ever here in this committee, noise emissions and areas like that. We speak about SAFs, but not noise emissions.
The answer to that is you have to be very careful with the Dutch. What's actually happened, the policy in Holland is twofold. One, they have lots of alternative ways of travelling across Europe. You can use trains or motorways, there's no issues. And the other thing the Dutch are engaged in is massively protecting KLM from competition. So they're artificially reducing capacity and slots at Schiphol Airport. They're forcing the other airlines. They've asked us and EasyJet to reduce our capacity there. They have come up with a list of measures by which, if you're connecting flights, you get priority, but if you're a point-to-point carrier, you have to reduce your flights and take them out of there. So a lot of what's going on in Amsterdam and Rotterdam is about protecting KLM. It has nothing to do with the environment at all. If you were really concerned about the environment, you'd be asking KLM, your national airline, to pay its fair share of environmental taxes on 100% of its traffic. And yet what they do is they exempt 84% of KLM's traffic.
May I ask, which national aviation policy do you think in Europe or worldwide at the moment is the best example that we should be trying to replicate here?
We don't do studies of worldwide aviation policy. I mean, I think the terms of what we've set out here, the Irish policy is fine. It talks about maintaining competitiveness of Ireland. It's just the day-to-day actions don't reflect what is the policy framework that was set out in 2019. We are already, Irish passengers, both visitors and citizens, are paying the highest environmental taxes of any passenger group in Europe to travel to a peripheral country where you don't have an alternative. We don't have the alternative trains or motorways to get on and off the island.
Okay. Could I next ask, given that favourable long-haul taxation regime, your airline in the past dabbled with the idea of going transatlantic. Is this in your medium or long-term plans, or is it totally gone off the agenda?
No, we're not going to be flying intercontinental. But what I can tell you, just going back on the Dutch issue of Rotterdam and Amsterdam, I mean, Rotterdam is in no way constrained. It did 15 flights yesterday in Rotterdam, and Shannon did 22. So, I mean, beware of what the Dutch say. I mean, like, Amsterdam is probably the worst run airport in Europe in the COVID crisis. Haven't been there recently. You can't get a cup of coffee in the airport after 9 o'clock. So they're not the people to be talking to in terms of either having an aviation policy. And we've got to get away from this thing of aviation being discretionary travel. What we know about, it's not just in Ireland, it's in Italy, it's in Greece, it's in Spain. Small and medium-sized businesses, people visiting friends and relatives, the Erasmus programme, these are all essential parts of aviation within Europe now. It's not all about tourism, but it is particularly in some of the island economies like Ireland, because that's where we get our employment from.
We spoke a while ago about the dominance of Dublin Airport. It's averaging around 87 to 90%, and nobody in this room ever expects to fully recalibrate that in other ways. But given that we've so many airports down along the west of Ireland, Shannon being in my own constituency, what is your take on that? Because you go in and you hardball with Mary Constantine and others, and you try to get arrangements so you can run routes, and I'm sure you strike good deals there. We're very grateful for what you're doing. But what can be done with all these airports along the west to achieve some form of counterbalance, partial counterbalance to what's happening in Dublin?
Okay. Firstly, Deputy, as you know, if you've ever nobody hardballs Mary Constantine. If anything, the hardballing goes in the other direction. Dealing with the management of Shannon Airport are tough operators. Look, it's very important. Ireland needs to go back to really, if you talk about international aviation, I always like to quote the example of Bristol. Bristol is a city with a population, a hinterland within 1 hour of Bristol of 10 million people. It has one airport. We're a population, a country in this population. You can take the Republic, we're 5 million people. You can add in the north, that's 7 million people. We have 13 airports if you include the north, and we have 11 airports if you include just the Republic. We are massively over-airported. And, nobody likes to hear that, but that's the reality. Does Dublin, the dominance of Dublin and Belfast is to an extent inevitable because of the very small population base. What has accentuated that dominance, and actually Dublin dominates Belfast too, is the motorway network, which is arterial to and from Dublin. People drive to Dublin, particularly when it's not during rush hour. It's easy to get to, and they will drive to Dublin Airport, and they drive to Dublin Airport from in the catchment of Belfast Airport as well. The future for the airports on the west of Ireland is, and I know some will raise Waterford, and Waterford has no future, but nevertheless, future for those airports is very perilous. Knock survives because actually the road network, once you get out into Mayo, isn't great, and there is enough inbound traffic that will go, particularly from the UK into the west of Ireland, will use Knock. But Knock means Galway Airport, in essence, has no future. And has no commercial future as a destination. Shannon struggles because of its physical location is on the far side of Limerick, when everybody, and some friends I went to school with who live in Neenah, used to always use Shannon until the M7, M9 was completed. Now they never go to Shannon, they go to Dublin. Cork struggles, partly because it's close to Shannon. If you're within 2 hours of 2 hours of an international airport is your catchment area. And if you take all those airports and draw 2-hour circles around them, they all kind of construct around the Midlands somewhere. Mullingar, Athlone is in the connection of everybody. So in reality, we think there's a viable future for Dublin, Cork, Shannon, Knock. There is no viable future for Donegal. There is no viable future for Sligo, for Galway, or for Waterford. And the money we waste, and we waste heroic sums of money on PSOs to those airports, is completely wasted. Kerry, again, only because of the road infrastructure down there. Yeah, I should have included. Kerry has a future, but it's as you can see, even in our ambitious plans, we see Kerry's traffic growing from 400,000 to 600,000. What Kerry do cleverly is they run a one-shift operation. So Kerry only opens at 9 o'clock in the morning and closes about 6 o'clock in the evening. The business community down there would like it to have an earlier departure in the morning and a late arrival in the evening, but it's only about 2 of them travelling on a daily basis. So But Kerry, sorry,
Michael. Look, I just, in the limited time I've left, Shannon Airport, I have to be a bit parochial here.
Yep.
So just like to know about yourself and Eddie, you've some massive announcements recently, Porto, Newcastle, some really good stuff, the new hangar, the jobs. Could you just give us the outlook for what you're planning in Shannon in terms of route development and in terms of job creation, and a little bit more detail on what will happen in this new hangar facility?
Yeah, we're going to conduct both line maintenance there and potentially heavy maintenance as well. Shannon is becoming a hub for engineering. There are some paint shops down there as well. But Shannon, will likely, could grow by 50% over the next number of years, and you're going to have it's at about 1 million passengers at the moment, and with the right aviation policy, I think we can develop it further.
Okay, can I very finally ask, I think it was 2013, 2014, Turkish Airlines put in a massive order for new aircraft comparable to your current 737 MAX order. And at the time, Turkish Airlines, shortly after putting down that order, they contacted Airbus, I believe, and insisted that given the magnitude of this huge order, that certain components of those aircraft would be manufactured in Turkey. Now, admittedly, they had an existing infrastructure there. I've met with some people in the MRO sector who feel that Ireland, beyond maintaining planes, painting them and doing everything else, the time is ripe now in Ireland. You have a dominant position in the budget airline sector. We have the aircraft leasing sector with a global dominance as well. The one area we fall back in, and we don't have any real infrastructures in terms of aircraft manufacturing, be it in the entire sense or be it in part sense. Given the €22 billion order you have and the large muscle you flex in European aviation, would you consider flexing that muscle to ask Boeing and others, if you do deal with them, that they would manufacture or do something here in Ireland to just give that adrenaline shot to our economy?
I mean, we have placed a large order with Boeing. We're a very big customer, but we don't have that kind of power or influence. You know, we are investing heavily in maintenance infrastructure in Shannon. We are investing very heavily. We're working with the DA to add 3 maintenance hangars at Dublin Airport. That will create far more jobs than asking Boeing to make bits of the plane here. There's no way Boeing, and you know, there are kind of military issues too when Boeing try to move aircraft kind of technologies out of North America at the moment. If anything, they're onshoring a lot of stuff that used to be in China, and it would be, we don't have that kind of clout. So the answer, I'm afraid, on that one would be no, but we can create a lot more useful jobs here with aircraft maintenance in Dublin and in Shannon.
Okay, and just finally on Germany, it's the third most in terms of tourism, travel into Ireland, it's the third most popular country coming in here, 8% of all tourism. It just seems to me that it's Europe's largest, most developed economy, and there could be more routes in there. Have you any strategy to get more Germans over to the wide Atlantic?
We do, but you know, it's interesting what has happened this year in Germany with the bailout from Lufthansa from the German government. I mean, they have retired 150 aircraft. And in July and August this year, the German short-haul market in total reduced by about 25%. And airfares subsequently went up dramatically out of Germany. So a lot of those, we should be worried about that as well, because Ryanair won't be able to fill all of that gap because of high airport charges. But we should be cognizant of the fact, particularly on this island for inbound tourism, that in the short term after COVID, the short-haul market has got smaller. Now, we are taking a larger slice in the short term of a dwindling cake in terms of short-term capacity. Germany is, yes, something that we will has been successful and we will grow, but it will be capped out by the fact that Germany is one of the countries that we've grown slowest in over the last 12 months, and we are likely to put aircraft elsewhere.
Look, I'm finished with my questions. Just want to thank you and keep up the good work. Thanks.
Thanks, Deputy.
Thank you, Deputy.
And next, we move to Senator Jerry Harkin. Senator Harkin, 10 minutes, and I have to be very strict on time.
And thanks very much to both Mr. O'Leary and Mr. Wilson for being here. I remember watching Ryanair's initial flight from Waterford to Gatwick as a school kid and thinking, will this ever last? And, you know, I think there was probably a time, Michael, when you went in there first and you weren't sure it would either, but, you know, it's certainly been transformed, and I want to thank you for what you've done, not just in terms of providing low-cost aviation for Irish people and people all over Europe, but for probably in its own peculiar way saving Aer Lingus from itself maybe at a certain point when it had to change to face the competition that you were providing it with and giving us 2 very good carriers. But particularly, you know, the connectivity you provide us with is fantastic. As you point out, we're a peripheral nation. We need aviation more than almost anybody else in terms of capacity. Cyprus, Malta, the same, but they're not the same size as we are. In terms of kind of the ETS, obviously that's one of your main gripes, and I totally get what you're saying and why you're saying it. Where do we go in terms of, it's the European Council of Ministers, it's the European Commission, we're not going to solve it in this committee on our own. We can jump up and down about it, as I know you had a call yesterday with Eurocontrol. I saw a reference to it in the Irish Times. What do you want us as a committee to do in terms of, is it tackling our Minister for Transport, is it tackling asking our Minister to go to Europe? What is the next steps in terms of, clearly it's absolutely ridiculous. I saw you don't pay taxes on some of them. That's presumably your flights to Morocco or Tel Aviv or these places, so they don't pay the charge.
Yeah, right? we start off with small free allowances, but we have a much smaller free allowance. Historically, you got free allowance based on your size, but because we keep growing, we have a much smaller free allowance. Okay,
but it's also, is it the flights that are outside the EU don't pay the charges?
Yes.
Yeah, so your flights to Morocco or
correct.
Tel Aviv or whatever don't. Okay. So where do we go, I suppose, with the ETS?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think, look, what we want Ireland to do, there is a growing sense among the peripheral countries, I mean, particularly the tourism countries and the islands. I mean, Greece, Cyprus, Malta, Portugal, Spain, Italy are growing increasingly concerned at the way that environmental taxation is being used by largely proposed by the Belgians, the Dutch, the German and the French, all of whom have alternatives to penalise short haul. And I think there's a growing sense that this needs to be pushed back. The Italian and the Spanish minister said they're going to block any further increase in environmental taxation on air travel. We see nothing similar coming out of the Irish government, and what we say, it should be at the heart of Irish government aviation policy. I mean, there was a meeting, there's been 2 meetings held by the peripheral transport ministers I think over the last 6 months, Ireland didn't even attend. They attended one transport meeting and made no contribution. Like, we are an island on the periphery of Europe. The UK has left the European Union, which in some senses is not good for us and weakens the European Union. But we have to explain and put forward our position. We don't have alternatives to get on and off our island. And our tourism industry is fundamentally, as is the tourism industry of Portugal, Greece, Malta and Cyprus, is fundamentally dependent upon having very competitive low access costs. So what do we want our government to do? We want our Minister for Transport to lobby strongly for a policy in Europe that European environmental taxes must be applied to all flights and should be applied fairly to all flights. And I think that's an unarguable case.
Okay, and the current mechanism, is it per passenger? Is it per flight? Is it per length of flight? Is it what's the actual charge? I mean, it's the same. Surely it shouldn't be the same. Dublin to Brussels shouldn't be as cheap as Dublin to Canaries, presumably. But is it? Or
it's environmental taxes. Like they're different in different countries.
Yeah, sorry.
But there's an EU,
and we buy ETS, so emissions trading. On the emissions trade, we buy carbon. We have to buy carbon credits. So we use up carbon credits. So it's basically on a per mile of flying.
Per mile of flying. Okay, so a charge. A Dublin-Brussels passenger will be charged less than a Dublin-Canaries passenger.
Yes.
And equally in intra-German...
Yes.
Sorry, John.
It goes to
EU platform.
It goes directly to the EU, and the EU returns the money to the member states, which is where Ireland gets its ETS revenues from.
To send off to Bus Éireann or whatever. Just in terms of I mean, obviously we all think of Ryanair as our national airline, but you're not... Ireland is not that big a percentage of your total traffic.
No,
what is
8%.
8%. But at the same time, you are hoping to grow by about 60 million passengers and put 15 million of that. So you're putting 25% of your growth into Ireland. So you clearly think there's a lot of capacity to deliver in terms of the demand from passengers. So a much bigger percentage of your growth is being put towards Ireland, you would like to, than towards a lot of your other markets.
I mean, Ireland continues to benefit hugely from the fact that Ryanair is based here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No other reason. It's not that it's the greatest tourism destination in the world, but we live here, we employ lots of people here, and we are very committed to working with the Irish airports and with the various Irish governments to increase air travel to and from Ireland.
And I think it's fair to say, you've always lived here and you've always paid your tax here, and other people of maybe the earning capacity of yourself haven't been doing the same. So I think we do appreciate that. In terms of where you see the growth from, primarily you've acknowledged Dublin, to where?
UK and Europe. I mean, largely.
I know. You don't operate anywhere. I mean, UK and Europe, but is it particular markets? Is it Spain, Germany, France?
I was sorry. In answer, in total, where will this traffic? How does Dublin get from 38 million to 50 million passengers? I think 10 or 11 of that 12 million growth will come on more additional flights from Europe, increasingly, by the way, from Central and Eastern Europe.
Okay.
And also from the UK. Those are the two biggest tourism markets we have. There is an over-preponderance, in my view, of focus on transatlantic, and airports love long-haul stuff because it's shiny and new, but it doesn't deliver significant traffic volumes.
No.
They do spend more, but actually if you take the traffic volumes on short-haul flights where you can deliver 2 or 3 flights a day is much more dramatic for our tourism industry.
Now, obviously, we've a lot of people going home to Poland or Romania and travelling forward and back. Have you any idea, because I don't think you collect that information, in terms of your business traffic versus your returning home traffic versus your pure tourist traffic? Have you any idea?
It splits about 30, 40. About 30% of people are travelling on business, about 30% are VFR, visiting friends and relatives, and about 40% is pure leisure.
Okay. You've shown us, in a way, you've told us that there is no aviation policy, and then you've kind of said the policy is fine, it's just the delivery of the policy is not. And then I suppose you're looking at the new policy. If you were the Minister for Transport in the morning, is this page, the Ireland needs a new policy 5-year growth plan? That's basically what you would do if you were in Eamon Ryan's shoes in the morning. You would drive down access costs, demand fair environmental charges, and try and reform ATC as best you can.
Correct.
Yeah. And in terms of ATC, what can we do? I mean, we've met Eamon Brennan. I've certainly met Eamon Brennan at the opening of the new tower, and I know Eamon from before, like he was Irish Aviation Authority as well. What would you do if you could? What can we do as a country? What can we do as a government or as a committee?
Very quickly, 3 things. Firstly, demand that the Commission has the legal power to insist that overflights are protected during national ATC strikes. That would mean that the French domestic flights get cancelled, but the flights overflying France are protected. That legal framework already exists. Protect overflights during national strikes.
Why hasn't that happened until now?
Because there is a reluctance among the Commission and individual governments. The French don't want to upset the French. The French don't want to upset the French unions, etc. etc. Our people, our citizens, our visitors are being completely screwed over. While a bunch of French air traffic controllers go on strike. And we fully respect their right to go on strike. But let the French take the hit. It shouldn't be Irish, Germans, Italians and Spanish who have not travelling to France to take the hit. The second one is you separate the upper airspace from the lower airspace. Eurocontrol, we believe, should operate. But the upper airspace is about above 25,000 square feet, about 25,000 feet. That, if you're up at that height, you can go direct. There's no need to zigzag. If I want to go to, it drives me, infuriates me. If I want to go to London, I have to zigzag north of the Welsh Hills down to Bristol. And if you go to Greece, you have to go across 18 different EU countries. And you're zigzagging so they all get a fee. I want to go straight. And if Eurocontrol, and the technology now exists. I mean, we inherited this system in the 1950s when planes didn't have radar and they were flying through clouds and they couldn't see where they were going. They're all up there. They have collision avoidance systems and the infrastructure. Irish ATC could run most of Europe's overflight system on its own. So we're massively overspecified. Separate the upper airspace and allow that to be run by Eurocontrol. And the third element would be simply push, although this would be impossible, abandon the Single European Sky. The Single European Sky has been one of the great European disaster movies of all time. It has been such a spectacular horror show that they've made a sequel which is called SES2, which would be equally as unsuccessful as SES1, which achieved nothing at all.
If just in the last few seconds, could you maybe elaborate on this disaster movie 1 and 2? Because I haven't actually seen either of them.
The European Commission proposed in 2001 that there would be a single European sky project. In other words, they would move to the same air traffic control system as America has, which is one system operated by all. The difficulty is that it's opposed by every single air traffic controllers union, national union, because it means less jobs for them. And therefore, they can't get national governments to agree to it. Now, in the old days, in the original successful days of the European Union, Peter Sutherland would never have got deregulated air travel or would never have liberalised air travel if you were waiting for the French and German governments to agree to it. But the European Commission lacks the bottle that those earlier commissions have to challenge the vested interests of the national governments.
And that would also provide us with environmental benefits in terms of fuel consumption.
Fuel savings, environmental emission reductions.
And if there is a chance to come back anyway, but just to thank you for everything you do, both yourself, but all of the Ryanair team in Ireland and right across Europe for the benefits you give to all of us. And thank you very much for being here. We hope to see you here again soon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Michael Lowry and Deputy Michael Lowry and Senator Jarrett have agreed to switch. So Deputy Lowry is taking Senator Buckham's space.
Because a lot of what I meant to ask has been asked, but I want to welcome Mr. O'Leary and Eddie, and we're used to having Eddie before us, particularly during COVID, where he was very helpful and gave us facts and information that allowed us to move to rectify some of the situations that had arisen. I'd like in particular to welcome you, Michael O'Leary. You have a proven track record. Your leadership has achieved something phenomenal in relation to the expansion and the growth of Ryanair. And there's no one better placed in Ireland to give us an overview of the industry and send us in the right direction. And I think that your presentation there has been interesting, informative to us, and will guide us in terms of an input into a national policy. I think the two areas that principally that you covered there was the climate levies, the ETS, and the regulatory regime, and you've expanded and developed on that. And I think those are the two issues, Chairman, that we as a committee have to move on. Could I say that as well, credit to you and your team for predicting the rapid recovery in air traffic. And we have had a serious problem in that you're one of the only people in the aviation sector. In fairness, I think Leo Varadkar has tarnished predicted it also. But unfortunately, the people who needed to predict it and foresee it was the airport, Dublin Airport Authority. And because they didn't predict it, you mentioned there that you expect that you will increase your passenger numbers by 19 million into Ireland over 5 years, and that you have already, even during COVID, invested in human resources and invested in new aircraft. Could I ask you, in relation to personnel, are you having a problem with recruitment? Every time we bring someone in here involved in the aviation industry, particularly the DAA, they get months here telling us about the problems they were having in their recruitment. Now, the main problem they had was that they disemployed people when they should have employed them. You were recruiting during COVID, they were disemploying, and it led to a massive problem which created a huge difficulty for Ireland as a nation and the perception of Ireland and its competence at an international level. So I just want to know why you're different. Now, in relation to regional balanced development, you mentioned that that Dublin Airport already has a monopoly. Now, there's a difference between a monopoly and a dominance. And as I see it at the moment, Dublin has the monopoly, which is creating massive problems for a lot of people. We have traffic congestion getting in and out of it. We cannot get a car park space in Dublin. Hotel accommodation has gone through the roof. When you get to the airport itself, you have problems with baggage handling, we have problems with going through security. We have problems with the food and retail outlets who are under pressure. So I don't understand why it is that all of the growth, or the most of the growth that you have is going into it. You're talking about extending Terminal D, I think you mentioned, or putting in a new terminal, extending Pier D, or putting in a new terminal. Like, our view is that what does it take to actually bring the likes of Shannon and Cork into the equation on a more serious level? Like, we have so many people travelling from Munster to take flights in Dublin. And I was interested in your connection between the road network and the airports. I didn't realise that that had such an impact until you mentioned the Cork to Dublin flights were actually cancelled because people now take the roadwork. So I think for planning in the future, that was something probably that was never considered, the impact that it has. And now it has a huge impact from an environmental reason because of the pollution on our road networks. So what do we have to do to bring Cork and Shannon more into the equation? What changes has to be made to the national policy? Obviously, people are travelling to Dublin because of the frequency of flights and because of the better options flying in and flying back. But what would Ryanair suggest that the government does to bring more regional balance and to is it infrastructure or is it a change in incentives for the airlines? What do we have to do to boost Cork and Shannon?
Just very quickly on the recruitment. What was different about us was that from the day one of the pandemic, I suppose like Paddy's Day back in 2020, we just thought about the day we were going to start again. We didn't know when it was going to be. So we kept everybody employed, we kept everybody current. And, you know, that didn't seem like such a remarkable or innovative or creative thing to do at the time. What we didn't realise was that everybody else let their staff go, and then were surprised when they needed them that they weren't there. So I think what happened then was that they let their people go, and it's taken them a long time. A lot of people left the workforce. But across Europe, we have had no real difficulty with recruiting staff, except for two areas. One in the UK because of Brexit, because they've self-imposed the sort of free movement of people. So entry-level jobs are more difficult to fill on a dwindling workforce. And here in Ireland, I would say the absolute number one blocker for getting people here is accommodation. There is no accommodation. There is zero accommodation. I think in the Swords area yesterday there was about 6 houses for rent. We have nothing but people who have want to come and work for us. And then they like a lot of people come from overseas as well, from Spain, Italy, France, places like that. They want to come and work here. There's Irish people that we recruit locally here through tourism schools and all that, but we bring people through as well because they get a job with us and they want to go home to Italy where we've got a base. They come here and they try it and they can't get accommodation. And that is, I thought I'd never say that we couldn't. I never thought we'd have a situation where we can't get people to come to Dublin because they've nowhere to live.
Another reason why you should have regional expansion rather than Dublin expansion.
Well, unfortunately, everybody wants to come to Dublin.
I'll touch briefly on that. We have to be very careful here, again, I go back as an island on the periphery of Europe. Firstly, if we can grow, and under our plan we grow traffic at Cork goes to 3.4 million passengers and Shannon gets to 2 million passengers, that is internationally, that 2 million passengers a year is the benchmark for being a sustainable international airport. At 2 million passengers you have sufficient services, retail, etc. to be sustainable. Anything below 2 million and you're really struggling. So I wouldn't underestimate the challenge of getting Shannon to 2 million or Cork to 3.4 million. But you have to be very careful. This was something that happened a lot during the baggage crisis or the staffing crisis at Dublin Airport. Why don't we just tell the airlines to go to Cork? 60% of our inbound passengers decide they want to fly to Dublin. Dublin is the draw here. Now, if you get them into Dublin, you get them on the island, a lot will drive around the island. But you can't tell half the English people, and we tried that for years. It was called the Shannon Stopover. It was the greatest crime against aviation in this country. But it was, for regional development reasons. If people want to come to Dublin, let them get to Dublin. A lot of them will actually try for. We have some significant success at the moment opening new routes to and from Cork, to and from Shannon. And Cork and Shannon are beginning to actually assert themselves and grow as destinations in their own right. And they're attractive destinations in their own right. But trying to artificially move people out of Dublin, if Dublin is where they want to go to or wherever, get them into Dublin, get them on the island first. And I think what we have to do is try to make the island in general more attractive, and that is make it more competitive. Implement, as Senator Horka said, the state of the current policy is fine. It's just nobody's implementing the current policy. We're not focusing on competitiveness. In fact, we have ministers talking about being less competitive by taxing ourselves even more at a time when we're trying to attract more people here. So just be careful, I think, with Dublin's dominance. Yes, it's dominant, but we're better off to have a very successful Dublin and out of that grow a successful Cork and Shannon. I'm trying to think of Limerick are having a great run at the hurling at the moment, but should we limit hurling? Should Dublin GA be broken up into two because they won 6 All-Irelands? No, the others have to come up and learn to compete. And competing is how you go forward. And I wouldn't want this contribution. You were one of, I want to recognise Pat, you were one of the more forward-looking transport ministers. I know it was many years ago, but I wanted to thank you. You did a great job when you were transport minister, and there are not that many transport ministers in my last 30 years that I would compliment, but you were one of them.
Game, set, and match. Thank you.
That's true.
Could I ask you one final question? In terms of your knowledge and your understanding, because you're on the cold face and you see it happening every day, security at Dublin Airport, 3D was trialled in Heathrow, and it's amazing that Shannon have it in place and our main airport, our monopoly airport, doesn't have it. What improvements can we make to get through people faster? Because obviously it impacts on your passengers. How can we improve security at Dublin Airport? It's a major issue. And final question, could I ask you, has the baggage situation been resolved, or are there still problems with the baggage from the point of view of your passengers?
Yeah, security at an airport is a logistical issue. Now, did Dublin Airport screw up in April, May and June this year? Yes, they did. They were short-staffed. But fundamentally, security is a function of having enough people and enough. They have enough X-ray machines to handle 34, 35 million passengers, as long as all of those X-ray machines are manned. And they did not man sufficiently of those machines. And if it backs up at first thing in the morning, there is no way of recovering that, because the waves of passengers keep coming. To be fair to the DA, they recovered it very well. I mean, we were very critical at the time. We felt that could have been, a lot of that could have been avoided if we had called out the army or security forces to give them short-term personnel. The situation wouldn't have arisen. We are very much in favour of the 3D scanners. We are concerned, however, there's two issues, and we're in correspondence with the DA at the moment. We are very concerned the DA may not have enough staff there for this Christmas. Now, they tell us that they're hiring and they're recruiting. They're talking about putting in 3D scanners in the spring, but they're talking actually about taking out existing lanes to put in 3D scanners, which will reduce security capacity at Dublin Airport. If you're going to put in 3D scanners, they need to be as additional lanes. They need less manpower. They need less people taking stuff out of their pockets. And so It is a logistical exercise. To be fair to Dalton Phillips and his team, the management up there last summer, they threw labour at it. They got away with it by the skin of their teeth after a very poor March, April, May. But we're not out of the woods yet, and I think we are very concerned about the Dublin Airport staffing this Christmas. And again, they need to start recruiting now for Easter next year is on the 7th of April, and we're in dialogue with them. They have interim management in place, but we are concerned. I'd put no stronger than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the machines that they put in are going to, if they're done correctly, they do significantly increase the throughput. But as Michael says, they're starting from next spring, and they are working well in Shannon and in Kerry as well. They've got new scanning machines there as well.
And in bags, I mean, if you were travelling with Ryanair, we had almost no bag issues. Mind you, we don't carry a lot of bags. Most of the bag challenges this year were connecting passengers and connecting bags, and the whole connecting bag system in Schiphol, in Heathrow, in Dublin, everywhere broke down. I think it will be better next summer. The airlines certainly would be better prepared for next summer, but you would be, if you are doing connecting flights, you're taking your life in your hands, checking bags through to your ultimate destination. Travel lighter and with smaller baggage.
Finally, just one question. You put up a red flag there about the problems with staffing for Christmas, and obviously that's something, Chairman, we'll have to take up with the DA. Yeah. Could I ask you, what formal liaison have you? Is there a formal process in place for liaison with the DAA? Because obviously, how often how does that?
Like, we regularly meet with them on an operational level. We would have met with the interim CEO. So yeah, there's a good working relationship there.
So you fed back that concern that you have over Christmas to them already?
We have.
Thank you.
It's my own slot now. So look, can I just take up a couple of points? We did DA in before us. As a new CEO of the DA has come in, we would expect that we will bring the DA in before us early in the new year, but we will write to them about the particular issues in terms of that they have sufficient staff both at Christmas and next Easter. Can I just ask one thing, just briefly, to following up? I had a quick look at your stats here, and in 2019, 86% of your traffic was coming through Dublin. So roughly at about 14% coming in the other airports. What you're projecting to 2027, 90% will be coming through Dublin, a higher share and 10%. So going back to, obviously to the core question, and we have a road network and so forth. So when you're somewhere like Shannon, and obviously I'm a TD in Limerick City, and we are very proud of how our haulers are doing, we expect to hope to continue to do so. Shannon has a capacity of 4.5 million passengers as an airport. So the question one has to ask is, and anyone going through, we flew out of Dublin Airport on a Ryanair flight to Schiphol, and being honest, it was chaotic. And that wasn't too long ago. It was utterly chaotic. We barely made our flight, and we were there well on time. So the question I'm asking is, yet if you fly through Shannon, you'll be through, it has the scanners, the 3D scanners. So the question the public always ask is, they love flying Ryanair, it's great you have extra flights going into Shannon. What does it take, and I know you're saying about competitiveness, is there a change, what does it change for Ryanair to fly extra flights out of Shannon Airport? What is that ingredient?
The simple ingredient, Cathaoirleach, is that Shannon would have a materially lower cost or a better incentive scheme than Dublin. But there's a limit to that. We have tried some routes out of Shannon that haven't worked. We continue to try new routes that are working very well. We've also very successfully put in a series of summer charter, summer flights down to Ibiza and Palma, which have been very well supported. But you cannot get away from the reality that, in the winter, Shannon is not that, say with great respect, Shannon is not a great destination. Limerick is a very fine city, but it hasn't got as much attraction or visitor attractions as Dublin has. Cork has slightly more. And Cork and Shannon are growing very well in a very difficult environment. But Dublin has hotel accommodation, it has a huge range of flights and services. We have a population here of 2.5 million living within an hour drive of Dublin. Dublin is, Heathrow, for example, has whatever it is, 65, 70 million passengers. Stansted only has 30 million passengers. Why don't more people choose Stansted? Well, because Heathrow is Heathrow, and it has connections and everything else. You shouldn't. I think you underestimate. It has been a remarkable success. Shannon, I think 10 years ago, had less than 1 million passengers.
Yeah.
When the fact that Shannon has grown to 2 million passengers, or close to 2 million passengers this year now, or could get to 2 million passengers by 2027, is a remarkable success, given that they've lost all the transatlantic or the stopover stuff. Shannon is very much standing on its own 2 feet. Cork is standing on its own 2 feet. And could we do more? Yes, but we are already doing more, and more can be done.
Okay, can I just go in then to the policy? So if I put the counter-argument back on the flights, the long-haul flights outside of Europe. So for a layperson looking in, the tax applies on inter-EU flights. So if you fly outside the EU, the likes of Morocco, it doesn't apply.
Yeah.
So if I say, and the long-haul airlines will come back and say, we will not be competitive on an international scale with other airlines worldwide if you're going to impose the environmental tax on us. What do you say to that?
Rubbish. The argument that's been made by the other airlines has been, that they use their political might. So the American airlines get the State Department to say, we're not paying environmental taxes, or the Russians, we won't pay the Russians aren't flying. The Chinese, we won't pay environmental taxes. This was tested in the European courts. Europe, if it has an environmental policy, is entirely free to tax the flights and on a departure basis. If you depart from a European airport or you uplift fuel at a European airport, you pay environmental taxes on the same fair basis as everybody else. But the legacy carriers, Lufthansa, Air France and KLM argue, you can't make us pay tax on our long-haul flights because the Americans won't pay, and therefore we'd have a competitive disadvantage.
It seems a reasonable argument.
Which is a reasonable argument, except Europe has the right to make everybody pay. The counter-argument is entirely unfair. Let's make the European citizens on short-haul flights, who are the most price-sensitive, the families going on holidays, pay all of the burden of the environmental taxes.
And if it applied to everyone, I see the European Parliament did vote in recent times during the year that it should be extended. So if the practicality was the decision was made, and I presume this would be a European Commission decision, correct?
European Commission, yeah.
If that decision was made, what impact would it have? You're saying €4.50 is the average cost per flight, which is about 12% of the flight cost. What difference would it make in terms of the person who's travelling on the Ryanair? What reduction would they see? What would that €4.50 go down to if it was extended to all airlines?
Well, if it was extended to all airlines without increasing the ETS revenues, then obviously our $4.50 would go down to probably $1.50. It would go down by about 2/3. And that would be meaningful for growth and incentive growing into routes and traffic into Shannon and Cork, peripheral destinations. Now, I think what's likely to happen is Europe would say, no, we want a slightly bigger cake, in which case ours may stay at $4.50 or it may come down to $4, may come down to $3.50. But at least Europe is able to hold its head up and say everybody is paying their fair share. What is unarguable at the moment is only the poor Europeans are paying all of it, and the rich Americans and the rich Chinese are paying none of it.
And what percentage of your flights are within the EU?
85, 90% of our flights are within the EU.
You're in essence a European airline, would that be a fair comment? And I know Mr. Wilson, who was brought up recently, why have you always, as an airline, not gone with the long haul, the transatlantic model? Why?
Because it's a different business. There are two fundamentals that make Ryanair almost very difficult to compete with in short-haul traffic. One is 25-minute turnarounds. And if you do a 25-minute turnaround instead of Aer Lingus at Heathrow would do about an hour and 50. If you do 25-minute turnarounds on 6 one-hour flights, you save 3 hours. And we do 2 extra flights per day per aircraft with the same aircraft, same crews. That makes us, on 6 flights, 33% more efficient, or on 8 flights, 25% more efficient than everybody else. And the other one is that on short haul, whether in North America or on Europe, premium business traffic is gone. Nobody will pay a premium. Nobody does business class anymore. When I first started flying back 30 years ago, you know, the rich business people would be on the Aer Lingus red-eye to Heathrow, quaffing champagne in a business lounge in Dublin Airport. Rich business people now want to get on the plane, get the hell out of there and go. Nobody will pay. So business class has disappeared on short-haul flights in North America and in Europe. You see that in Aer Lingus as well as. Long haul is different because for those two reasons. One, it doesn't matter if you turn the plane around in 25 minutes or 3 hours, you're still only doing 2 flights per day per aircraft. And there is 20% of that marketplace will pay an enormous premium, business class, first class, on transatlantic flights. They want flat beds and all. They will pay ridiculous premiums. And the transatlantic airlines can sell all of the economy seats free if they want to, and the premium business will still pay for that business.
And can I say then, on the ETS, you're not saying that you will not pay it. You basically want that what's being collected should be distributed amongst all airlines.
Every air passenger travelling to and from Europe should pay their fair share of environmental taxes.
And the money that's raised, 140 million, that comes back to the Department of Transport, the Irish government. What, in terms of the redistribution of that money, how would that assist you in getting to emissions reductions quicker?
Yeah, the Irish government undertakes with the European Union that it will apply those ETS revenues for climate reduction measures. Now, we would say, obviously, the best climate reduction measure here would be subsidise Ryanair's aircraft investment because they burn 16% less fuel and it's our scimitar winglets. But if you don't want to subsidise our huge capex, we would say use that money to provide sustainable aviation fuels at the 3 main Irish airports, Shannon, Cork and Dublin. Require all airlines operating at those airports to uplift a proportion of sustainable aviation fuel, and there it becomes a circular thing. The people who are paying those ETSs see some benefit in having more sustainable aviation fuel available at Cork, Shannon and Dublin, and Knock and...
So in short time...
Use the money for identifiable climate reduction initiatives.
In terms of we'll have the respective ministers, Minister Ryan and Minister Hill, Knock and in before us next week on this particular matter. So if you were to prioritise, Mr. O'Leary, in terms of what you want in terms of the actions and the priorities under a new national aviation strategy, given to me and rank them in order.
1, Ireland's competitiveness. That leads inevitably to 2, a fairer distribution of environmental taxes. ETS, fairer distribution of environmental taxes. And 3, lower cost facilities at the main Irish airport, well, principally at Dublin and the other main Irish airports.
And that final one, how do you believe the lower costs can be achieved?
Cancel the plan or ignore the plan to spend 200 million building a tunnel under a taxiway and use that 200 million to extend terminal facilities, the Terminal D facility at Dublin Airport.
Thank you.
And by the way, there are many other international airports where people need to cross a taxiway. They use lights and gates, a bit like a railway crossing. It's only a taxiway. It's not in use that often during the day.
And then
you should drive across the taxiway.
How many people are you employing now in Ireland and worldwide at this moment in time?
Worldwide now, this summer 19,000. We will hire our 20,000th employee in the summer of 2023, and in Ireland I think the figure is heading for about 3,000. Is that about right?
And what percentage of flights and passenger numbers in and out of Ireland is Ryanair making up at this moment in time?
I think our percent market share in Ireland, I think out of Dublin we're at about 56%. Yeah. And so we're probably heading for 60% if you add in Shannon, Corks and the rest of it. Somewhere just under 60%.
And how many passengers will you carry this year?
168 million.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just add one thing to what we would ask the Minister
we'll be following them
for transport. If we look at the airport charging environment as well, that those airlines that invest in more fuel-efficient aircraft divvy up that cake of charges on a per passenger basis on those who have less of a carbon footprint, so that you actually incentivise airlines that invest in lower emission aircraft. And there's no differentiation on that at the moment.
Okay, we'll take that, and we'll probably follow up again just to put absolute structure on it, so that we can bring it back to the Minister and Government.
Meeting that what Mr. Wilson just said.
Obviously, I would expect Minister Ryan will be very favourably disposed towards your proposal. So, in essence, what you're saying is, if I'm feeding back into the funding being spent to promote fuel efficiency in terms of environmental, that if airlines adopt it, then there should be a reward for it in terms of reduced charges and passed on to the passenger.
Yes,
a circular model, basically.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll now move to absolutely.
I mean, there's two things within it. One is the existing airport charges, so that those airlines that have a higher fuel footprint. So in other words, it's no different than having larger trains or larger buses that carry in airplanes that carry more passengers, that you spread those charges on. There's really accurate data now on what the CO2 emissions are per passenger, and if it's less, then you should be charged less. You have larger aircraft that are more
and
fuel
there's
efficient.
metrics that can be
And
measured.
the second thing is the circular one that you talked about, is that the money that comes back, instead of going into the school buses, that they go into issues like sustainable aviation fuel and getting that those facilities at the airports.
All right, we'll now move to Deputy Rory O'Murrow. 10 minutes.
You're probably not going to get a huge amount of people here that are going to give out about school bus transport. You know, it becomes a disaster issue that we have to deal with on a year-by-year basis. Anyway, look, this is where I usually apologise if I'm going to repeat myself, and I'm fairly sure I'm going to repeat myself. Look, you've been very clear in relation to the points that you've made. Accommodation at this stage, the disaster that it is in this state is having a huge impact in relation to your business. Yes, that's it. Yeah. See, in relation, and Michael, you dealt with a bit of this as regards the various crises we had in airports, and obviously insufficient staff, and that was security, baggage handling, the fact that there were limits in relation to certain hub airports. You're obviously worried about what's happening in this. You're worried about what could possibly happen in Christmas. Are you particularly worried going into next summer that we still are not where we need to be? Or
I won't refer any strong. We're concerned, and we're raising those concerns directly with Dublin Airport. We are concerned that there may be security shortages, staffing shortages this Christmas, and if they don't recruit now in significant numbers, that we may be short again at Easter and in for peak next summer. Now, I think they'll get through it, but if we move early, we're not talking about a lot of additional security staff, so there's really no reason that we should have those issues.
Yeah. So if we do that early, we won't need a big challenge. All right, no, that's cool. Obviously, your main point, or the biggest one, well, one of them is the open skies, direct flights, and you've obviously spoken about the fact that obviously there are certain stakeholders that would have a difficulty around this. What are the conversations with the European Commission and whoever else in relation to getting this happening? Because you're not the first person that has brought this up, even in the last number of weeks here.
Specifically on environmental taxes or open
No,
skies?
I'll go. The open skies.
The open skies, I mean, we spent yesterday in Brussels with the A4E, the airlines group, and there is huge frustration. You meet MEPs and the Commission, huge frustration at the failure to make any progress on open skies. Open skies has been a European Commission project for 21 years. Not 1 centimetre of progress has been made.
And you said 20% of fuel would be saved. And what was the other? Because I actually missed it. Was 90% of...
90% of flight delays would be eliminated.
Oh, right. Well, there.
I mean, the vast majority of flight delays are generally ATC slots.
Sorry, what's critical about this, everybody's got flight radar.
Oh, no, the technology is now in a different place.
It's actually there. Nobody has to change anything whatsoever. When they started this single European skies way back in 2000, that technology wasn't there. No changes have to take place at all. And as Michael says, the Irish aviation or air traffic control system could operate it from here. So it's already there. The technology and Eurocontrol, based in Belgium, can actually do the overflights. So it's all there, ready to go.
Cool, right. Obviously, in relation to airport charges, you've been clear, right? It's PRD rather than the tunnel, which you're obviously not a supporter of. I think that would be fair to say. Yeah. But if we're talking, then we move on to because there's an awful lot of conversation, some of it geographically on the basis of where some of the TDs that sit around here are from. And look here, regional balance is a responsibility of government policy and all the rest of it. And look, you've given your opinion in relation to which airports in a regional basis are fit for purpose and which can do business. Because I think sometimes, you've said it yourself, we've ended up in cul-de-sac conversations of when we had disasters in Dublin Airport, we need to shift this over here, and that's a simple solution. And the fact that could we not just sort of displace, whereas the reality is the hubs are going to work, those regional airports are only going to work on doing their own business, and that may be connecting into hubs across Europe, but it can't be about displacement. Sure. So it's I suppose it's us having a real conversation on that, and just driving at a top level. Okay, you were talking about, right, new flights, that's Egypt and Libya you're looking at the minute?
We're talking to, as asked yesterday in Brussels, are we looking at other countries outside Europe? Well, Ukraine was the country. We had 2 million passengers flying to and from Ukraine when the invasion happened. We were shut down overnight. We are very committed to Ukraine. We will be the first airline back into Ukraine, and we're working on a plan. We think Ukraine, which, by the way, is a population the same size as Poland, and we're the biggest airline in Poland. We want to put. We had an original plan to base aircraft in 4 Ukrainian airports. If the war obviously finishes in favour of Ukraine, and the European safety authorities say it's safe to go back in there, we would go back in there, open up at least 2, probably 3 bases in Ukraine, and we think we could carry between 5 and 10 million passengers there.
All right.
I should just go back to on the regional airports. I mean, look,
yep.
We all. This is a political world, and this island is a village. So everybody, we recognise the challenges that TDs and senators face from their local airports. I get more letters every year, and I'm not a politician, from Abbeyshrew Airport wanting to know why we can't have jet services in out of Abbeyshrew if we only built a runway there. And I write back.
You're considering it?
No, you're in the I don't. I keep shooting it down. You're in the catchment area of Dublin and Knock, and we don't need another runway in Dublin.
So you've no plans for doing anything in Dundalk either then, no?
Sadly, no. You're caught between Belfast and Dublin.
That's all right. Well, look, I appreciate your candor.
A growing number of our employees are actually living in Dundalk. It is one of the areas where actually increasingly our employee base is very happily living in Dundalk and commuting.
Well, sure, it's a wonderful place. I'm sure you'd agree yourself.
See if we're towards the Midlands now, but
I couldn't possibly comment. You've also dealt with the fact, obviously, I suppose 2 things. If we're talking about the big wins in relation to sustainable aviation fuel, you're also talking about, obviously, the new cohort of aeroplanes that you're taking on board. Obviously, some of those, you're talking about improved technologies and whatever. So it's 2 things. If you could get into the ins and outs and the wins that are there, what needs to be done from a matter of ensuring that not only yourselves but across the board we have a sustainable aviation policy that works. As I say, I think there is a difficulty, isn't there, in relation to your plans as regards how quickly you can get some of these airplanes.
Mm-hmm. Boeing are challenged at the moment. We were supposed to get 51 aircraft delivered to us by the end of April of next year, 21 pre-Christmas. We'll only get 12 prior to Christmas. We're hopeful at this stage we'll get about 40 of those 51 aircraft by the end of June, but we're probably going to be left 5 or 10 aircraft short, and that will limit our growth next summer.
Just definitely. And then in relation to aviation fuel and, as I say, the improved technologies in the planes that you're getting?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about are the energy companies going to be incentivised to actually produce that? It's 3 times more expensive than standard Jet A1 at the moment, and they need to. There's no joined-up thinking on this in Europe. What you have is that you have individual governments mandating that airlines take so much, but nobody's put the thought into who's going to produce it. One of the biggest plants being produced at the moment is in Spain, in southern Spain, by one of the oil companies down there. But what they'll produce in a year, we'll use in a month. And so you need that type of volume.
So we're only playing around at the minute?
What's that?
Yeah. We're only playing around at the minute?
Yeah. I mean, you get things in the United States. In California, for example, they're able to write off all the profits for sustainable aviation fuel, and something needs to be done with the energy companies to encourage them to do that, so that there's no point in saying that you've got to uplift 5 or 10% if it doesn't exist.
Right, so it's a proper conversation by those that matter with the energy companies. Beyond that, is there's still room for manoeuvre in relation to research, and I imagine there's a significant amount that's happening at the minute, but then
the difficulty with research, new technology in aviation, because of the safety requirements that are appropriate, is very difficult. Look at the difficulty Boeing have had in get the MAX was grounded for 2 years. That's a great aircraft. We get 9 more seats per aircraft, but it burns 16% less fuel. Our fuel bill next year will be €5 billion. So if you can save 16% of 5 billion, it is very significant. But there are I was in Brussels yesterday, meeting French MEPs who were assuring me that Airbus will produce a hydrogen engine by 2035. I had to explain to them, we're already ordering the aircraft for 2035. There is no hydrogen engine going to arrive here before 2040 or 2050.
unless something
so
changes.
Technology is not the solution. If we could do the two simple things first, which is A, fix ATC. I mean, we're talking about having a SAF mandate, or Europe wants to have a 2% of SAF usage in the next 5 years. If you fixed ATC, you'd save about 20% of your fuel, never mind 2%.
No, well, that sounds like an obvious straightaway win, given that there are particular issues. You may not want to go into this. What about, obviously, there's been the Booking.com screen scraping over and back, and it's in the courts.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have a fundamental issue with what we call OTAs, online travel agents, who use technology, bots, to scrape our inventory and then missell it to consumers, generally speaking, overcharging them for hidden handling fees, inflating the prices, and then not giving us false email addresses. We had terrible trouble during COVID routing refunds back to people because we had a bogus or an invented email address for them. We have taken numerous actions against Booking.com. They've lost, by the way, most of those cases. They're now taking some kind of defamatory action against us in the US for demeaning them. We don't demean them at all. We'd be very happy to go to some US court and explain to the judge how these guys are ripping off consumers. We find it regrettable that our consumer protection agencies won't take action. We've brought these specific cases to their attention.
So you're fairly sure you're going to keep winning?
With the screen scrapers who are online pirates, yes.
All right. And one last question. It's obviously some of this is in the public domain as well. It's in relation to requests by workers for pre-pandemic pay and conditions. I think you've said that you have deals done with nearly all the unions, but then there is a case, isn't there, in the WRC?
Yeah, I mean, we have what happened at the start of the pandemic was that we kept everybody employed. It didn't have any redundancies, and we agreed with the unions. If you take the pilots, they took a 20% pay reduction, and that was due to be restored in various phases out until 2025. So what we did was we did agreements with well over 90% of the unions, including the cabin crew and engineering unions here in Ireland, and they have all had their pay fully restored, and they have done longer term agreements on a very sensible basis to continue with employment. And unfortunately, the last union is the Irish Pilots Union, which is in the WRC this week, and haven't got their money fully restored at this stage, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to come to some agreement. But that framework has already been set down with all the major unions in Germany, Italy, France, Sweden, and all those other countries. So we'd be reasonably confident.
Very considerable anger among our pilots, which we're aware of here in Ireland, that the Forza union hasn't agreed a similar pay restoration and pay increase agreement that every other pilots union across Europe has already agreed.
So you foresee there'll be a solution to this very quickly?
I don't, but I mean, I'm not sure the WRC is going to advance it, but we're happy to go there. I mean, fundamentally the Forza union, or certain individuals in the Forza union, has promised our pilots that they'll get pay restoration back to the pre-COVID. They won't. No other group has got it. Sorry, Ciarán.
I'd ask members to stick strictly to the time. Senator Crockwell, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Very welcome, both gentlemen, to the House today. And like my previous colleagues said, you did turn aviation travel into literally jumping on a bus. And it's great to see. I went to England back in the days when we used to have to go on a boat, and many of the people I travelled with didn't even speak English. They spoke Irish, and it was tough times. So you have changed the world of aviation. Yes, I'm showing my age.
I was on that boat, and there weren't that many speaking Irish.
I doubt if you were on it at the time I was, but anyway. Listen, you're in aviation. How do you feel about the fact that our Department of Transport, which develops aviation policy, has been advised by the Air Accident Investigation Unit to have an aviator on its staff, and they have ignored that advice or recommendation from air traffic or air accident investigation? As a company who flies in and out of this country and is working under the policy that's laid down by this country, how do you feel about the fact that a recommendation from AAIU is ignored?
We've got to be very careful here. We have aviation safety is independently regulated by the Irish Aviation Authority. And it should not be devolved to somewhere else. They are very experienced, they're very skilled at what they do, and the reputation of Irish aviation is, very high around the world as a result of what the IAA, under the aegis of the European Safety Agency, does. I'm not quite sure if I understand. We would not want to see those skill sets devolved or in any way kind of grey area by appointing aviation experts into the Department of Transport. That's not what the Department of Transport is not responsible for safety. The Irish Aviation Authority is, and I would want us to very much to keep and the IAA to maintain the very high standards they have there.
Yeah, I don't think they were recommending that the person in there would, if you want, have safety, but would have the expertise to talk to the IAA and to companies like your own. And I think that's an important issue for me.
When you start having two different set of safety experts, like the IAA are the safety experts, and the Department of Transport, I think, have very good relationships with the IAA. And if there's an expert, there is no shortage of access to IAA expertise, and if the Department of Transport needs access to IAA expertise, the IAA would happily provide it.
I'm delighted to hear that. Now, the other thing is you've been speaking on down through the years is the way that we run this country, and particularly in the area of public procurement. Sorry, no. Let's not try and shut me down here. Public procurement.
I'd say, Senator Crockwell, try and find some way to keep within national aviation strategy.
Public procurement is something you've spoken on quite frequently, okay? And it applies to the airline industry the same as any. As a member of this House, you come in here and you're questioned by all of my colleagues here and you answer the questions. We frequently find that those who are in charge of public procurement will not appear before these committees, will not answer questions. And I think in your earlier submissions, you've made the point that, we should have greater oversight of these things. I'm just wondering, as the CEO of a major company, if
Senator
one of your
Crockwell,
people
just
said
be careful not to stray into...
don't worry, I won't stray anywhere. I'm very, very clear where I'm going. It is becoming a serious problem, and you've spoken on national issues several times, Mr. O'Leary. It is becoming a serious problem that we cannot get decision makers to come before committees in this House and answer questions in relation to how decisions were arrived at. And that applies to things like the National Children's Hospital, it applies to things like search and rescue, it applies to various other things. We're constantly confronted with commercial sensitivity. And I would be interested in your opinion. You can tell me to go take a jump in the lake if you want, but I would be interested. When Michael O'Leary speaks, people in Ireland listen.
Taking it back to to aviation policy, all I can say is in terms of public procurement, the DA, I think the Department of Transport have initiated a consultants report. So we're having some kind of consultant study on the future plans for Dublin Airport. And I think that's, generally speaking, where certainly in aviation, where public procurement goes wrong because it starts with consultants reports instead of talking to the customer first. I mean, the first thing the Department of Transport should do is talk to Aer Lingus, Ryanair and the other airlines. What is it you need to enable you to deliver this growth? And I sometimes regret the amount of money and time that is wasted on consultants' reports that really fail to achieve much, where there are front-end customers in the health service that may well be patients. Certainly in aviation, it's the airlines. We should speak on behalf of our customers.
And Mr. O'Leary, in that context, right, how often do you meet the Department of Transport and the ministers?
I mean, honestly, not that rarely, I would say, not that frequently, but to be fair, that's not unusual. We don't meet with lots of departments. We meet with the airports regularly because that's the service we need and provide. I think it is regrettable that we haven't had a sit-down with, I think every time a new government takes place, the Department of Transport should sit down with not just us, but with the other airlines and say, what can we do? What can we do for you? How can we develop policy? That framework doesn't exist and hasn't under a number of recent transport ministers.
That's something that certainly we can take.
And I think that's one of the reasons we want to come to the committee today was actually, let's air what we think policy should be, and maybe we use the committee to influence the Department of Transport in that respect.
Absolutely.
Chairman, there's lots of people here want to ask questions. So, Mr. O'Leary, I want to thank you for your candour, and I'm really delighted you mentioned the issue of consultants. In this country, we have consultants for everything, and we're spending millions on them. So I'm glad you highlighted it as well as me. It's rare as a former trade union leader that you and I would agree on much, but there you go, we agree on this one. So thank you, Chairman.
Okay, and thank you, Senator Crockwell. You banked a couple of valuable minutes there. We'll now move to Senator Jerry Buttimer. 10 minutes, Senator Buttimer.
Because most has been asked. Can I welcome Mr. O'Leary, Mr. Wilson, and thank you for your contribution to our economy and to the provision of jobs. And as you said, Mr. O'Leary, and if I could ask you to keep repeating, we are a peripheral nation dependent upon air connectivity. Do you think the remarks of the Minister for Transport in COP will have a negative effect on airline travel for us as a country?
I don't think and remarks generally won't have negative effect, but if the remarks are translated into action, if Ireland sits there and allows additional levies to be imposed on aviation, not just Ireland's connectivity will be threatened. And I think sometimes, the people who are involved in the green movement have the green agenda. Our tourism industry, which is huge in this country, is hugely dependent on low-cost access. And I think we need to have a fairer. It starts off, we accept that all of our passengers should pay an environmental charge, but it should be fair and it should be reasonable. And so, no, I don't think the Minister's remarks will have an effect. But if the Minister's remarks are translated into continuing action that disadvantages peripheral countries around Europe, then it could have a damaging effect in the future.
We had Willie Walsh here a couple of weeks ago, and you today in your presentation struck a very similar theme to him in the context of Dublin. And it'll be no surprise to you, given that I'm from Cork, that I want to raise an issue around your presentation today in the context of Cork and Shannon and other regional airports. What can we do as a committee to broaden the appeal of airports like Cork and Shannon? And I take your point that you can't artificially take the 60% of the flying population coming in inbound. But could I ask, for example, and I know you're in negotiations, having our conversations today over in the Merrion with Cork Airport around a new deal, and I hope that goes well. And I hope that you'll bring the third aircraft back for the winter and summer of next year. But can I just ask, as an example, I know it's a very simplistic approach now, but you take Ryanair, for example, you fly to Rios, as an example. Aer Lingus have abandoned Cork to Barcelona. Is there a possibility? Vueling may, and I'm not saying they will, but they may look at that route in the same way that KLM with Aer Lingus in Amsterdam or Cork. Is there any, and I'm only asking the question in the context of Barcelona, which is a major city of population coming back as well as going out. So is there a reason why you wouldn't fly to the main airport in Barcelona rather than Rios?
I mean, Barcelona is full at the moment.
Right.
It's slot constrained, and it's not being expanded. And Rios is a seasonal route for us, but it's got a reasonable access into Barcelona. But it's not that we're trying to have a secondary airport or something for Cork. We just don't have the slots there for that.
Okay. And then the 60% coming into Dublin, what can we do? How can we help inform a different approach? Because both you and Willie Watts did the same thing.
The thing that Cork and Shannon can do best is be very competitive, have lower access costs than Dublin Airport. Cork has been held back for a number of years. To be fair, the current management has changed that, but Cork was charging published charges, which were exactly the same as Dublin.
Okay.
If Cork Airport charges the same charge as Dublin Airport, the airlines and the passengers will go to Dublin. Cork must be materially cheaper than Dublin. It has an infrastructure, a labour market that allows it to be cheaper, and the charges need to be lower at both Cork and Shannon. That's the only way forward.
Okay, your previous employee, Mr. Jacobs, is taking over the new role as chair of Dublin Airport Authority, and I want to wish him well, and I propose that we invite him, when he takes up tenure, to come into the committee. Do you think, given his experience of the aviation industry, will be a help or a burden to the DAA?
Well, I think, he's a good guy. It will certainly be of help to the DAA to have somebody with at least a low-cost background. He has a very successful retail career before he joined Ryanair. It will certainly be helpful to the DAA, Dublin, Cork and Shannon airports, to have his expertise there. But no matter who you put in to run Dublin Airport, it faces very significant challenges. It's very heavily unionised. Hiring more labour at security is not easy, and it doesn't move at great speed. So, no matter who, we wish him well. I think with the first item on the agenda, I'm sure we'll be fighting with him pretty quickly into his tenure. But recognising also the DA is a much bigger. They manage airports in Middle East and in Russia and all that. It is a very challenging, I would say, an exciting position, but there is much to be done. And the first thing we would be critical of him is if he doesn't cancel this 200 million tunnel.
And that's my next question. So today, repeatedly, you have raised the 200 million tunnel. For those of us who are members of the committee, can you explain, and to those watching and those who are here from the media who are reporting on this, the import, not of the 200 million, but that too, but what is this tunnel going to do for the travelling public in Dublin Airport?
Nothing, absolutely nothing.
And is that just your view, or is that a universal view?
I would doubt if any airline can see why the whole. This is a longer discussion. Dublin now has 2 parallel runways, which is a terrific success. One of the few airports in Europe with 2 runways. They have an old taxiway that runs across it. And at the far side of that is where the tower is. Yeah. It's also where Macavatti lands are, which have been raised. What the DA want to do is to be able to drive buses under this thing instead of driving it across the taxiway, so that you can free up more of that land out there, and maybe at some point in the future build a third terminal over on the far side so that you can sterilise Macavatti's land and make sure it never... it's all rubbish. It does nothing for traffic at Dublin Airport, which needs additional terminal facilities on the North Apron where the second runway is now open. And we would encourage and urge the DA to get on with building the facilities that we, the airports, want and will pay for, and stop screwing around with the West Apron that none of us care about or will ever want to use anyway. I mean, it is as simple as this. You can drive across that taxiway with railway bridges and stop-go lights. I mean, the aircraft do not taxi up and down it very frequently. So it's not that you can... And they want to seriously... not only do they want to spend 200 million building a tunnel under a taxiway, can you imagine the disruption to aircraft movements for the 18 months or 2 years while they're tunnelling under it and having lorries going X, Y? It does nothing for the travelling passengers or for the airlines. It is simply a way of inflating the capital base so that they go into the regulator looking for, we had to spend all this money, now we need a return.
Their application gone in for planning.
We've objected to the planning as well. We feel so strongly about it.
You have put in a formal objection.
Yes. That was my question, and you've articulated that formally to the DA as well.
Yep.
Okay, Chairman, that's my conclusion. Just thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I wish you well, and I hope you conclude that deal in Cork, because it's very needed for our city and county. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now move to Senator Timmy Dooley. Senator Dooley, 10 minutes.
Senator.
Thank them sincerely for coming to see us again. And to put on record, my thanks to everything that you have done, particularly in the last couple of years. You've done an immense amount of work for Irish aviation over the years. We don't always agree on certain aspects of it, but I think the proof of the pudding has been the way in which you have built a company that sustained the whole COVID pandemic really, really well. The fact that the way you retained staff and were able to be back running when people right across Europe were depending on an Irish airline. It really was good to see that. So thanks for that, and look forward to your continued growth and success. Because a lot of people have talked about the national piece of it. I'll stick maybe just to the domestic. We'll look at Dublin for a second. I think what you're saying about Dublin Airport is right. You said it way back when the new terminal was being built. I asked Willie Walsh the same question here last week or the week before. The current Terminal 2 is not really fit for purpose. It was designed as a feat of engineering and architecture, but quite frankly, anybody that goes through the airport regularly will know that it's not fit for purpose, even for not just the machinery that's used for bags, just the whole space. It's just not conducive to the movement of people, but it looks great from outside. So I think you rightly raise concerns that we need to address with the management in relation to the tunnel. I'm sure there's a cheaper solution. And you're right, Dublin Airport has reached capacity at the minute in terms of its terminal. The area that you occupy needs more space. So do the southern gates, which is also a bit of a mess. although whenever there's a mention of increased capacity at Dublin Airport, people in the Midwest, and I'm sure in Cork, I don't want to speak for them, but certainly in the Midwest, and in Clare in particular, sigh and say, if Dublin gets more capacity, that'll be the demise of Shannon. I'd like to hear your view on that. I have a fair idea of what it is. And then the next question that I'd ask is, so the business community in and around Limerick and Shannon and Clare generally talk about the necessity to have direct connectivity to the likes of Schiphol or Frankfurt. Yeah. What do you say to Mary Considine? Maybe you're not in a position to provide it, but if you were to advise, given your very significant experience, into a facility like Schiphol or Frankfurt, what should the airport be doing, and how would they go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of just because capacity increases at Dublin, that somehow or other means that there's going to be an automatic reduction in capacity or attractiveness of Shannon. I mean, Shannon has plenty of capacity for us to grow in terms of contact stands and terminal capacity in particular. It's all about Shannon making itself more attractive, and you will know that there's a huge effort gone in building the infrastructure in Shannon at the moment. You've got Land Rover and people like that, I think, that have put in some of their research and development there. There are other engineering companies, and what they're trying to do is to build up that sort of industrial park space around there, so that in itself creates people that will bring employment in and make it more attractive for us to see demand to put roots in there. So Shannon won't necessarily be affected by what will happen in Dublin. It's its own unique destination. It can't grow as fast as it, but Dublin is Dublin, and as we said earlier, I mean, Dublin by itself will will attract more people into Ireland, and hopefully they'll make their way to the Midwest as well. But like, Shannon has done a spectacular job. We had this seesaw approach for many years, and we just circle back to what the chair here says in terms of what you want from the Department of Transport. It's just exactly like what you want from an airport. You want predictability over a long period of time so that you can allocate your resources, and if those resources are going to go to Shannon or they're going to go to Ireland, then that's why we need that aviation policy, so that we can plan with certainty for the long term. And
so then what could that policy do over and above what you've already said to give you more certainty about placing more aircraft just for your own kind of business model at the moment in Shannon?
There's two things. I mean, it's cheaper, or there's more, and there's more reasons to go there. And if they're attractions or it's employees coming and going because of an expanded sort of industrial framework down there, then that's what you can do. You can't do this thing just necessarily by trying to grab the passengers from one part of the country to the other, because it's the people, over 50% of the people are incoming, and they want to decide to come to Dublin rather than Shannon.
And then just, Michael, in terms of using your genius to say how you could create a demand, or how you would put in place a connection between one of those international hubs, say Schiphol. I know there's constraints there, there's constraints in Frankfurt as well.
Actually, I mean, again, there's a grave danger there, Senator, that we're going to go back to kind of 1960s thinking this is all about hub airports and connecting flights. There's very little future for the Irish regional airports in connecting flights and connecting to hub airports. We've moved beyond that. That was the kind of the Shannon stopover kind of mentality of the 50s and 60s. People want to fly direct. What Shannon and Eddie and the team are working very closely with Mary Considine and her team is to develop more direct flights, getting incentives there agreed so that we can put in, even if it's only summer flights, generally speaking, lead to more winter flights, and we're desperately trying to grow. In fact, we put some inbound services back into Shannon this winter as well. Let me give you one example, and I think it's one of the great successes of the Midwest. As the dollar is incredibly strong at the moment. I mean, I brought my kids down to Rome for the school midterm in October, and you couldn't get in and out of Rome with the number of Americans that were wandering around Rome. The dollar is very strong. The American transatlantic traffic is phenomenally strong. Huge volumes of Americans are now coming to Dublin. They play golf in Portmarnock, and then they head off down to the jewels of Adair, Lahinch, Ballybunion, Waterville. There's an example of incredible success where actually the regions are benefiting from the growth and strength at Dublin Airport. I mean, my good friend JP McManus has got the Ryder Cup is coming to Adair in 2026. So the way for that, the way that you draw and build, will that, I'm sure we'll get lots of traffic coming to Shannon in 2026, but the way to build that traffic and to help Shannon grow is to continue to make it easy for people who want to come to Dublin, but move them around the country when we get there. The real challenge here is get them on the island first, and then let's try and move them around the island as best we can. But if we are to insist that you can only go to Shannon or you must come to Cork, you won't get them here. Is that fair?
Yeah, thanks very much. And just in your absence, when Willie Walsh was here, we were commenting on and feting you for your early investment in sustainable fuel research at Trinity College. Could you talk to us just a little bit about that in terms of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve there, and also maybe to connect it into what's happening in the Midwest, where the ESB are proposing to generate hydrogen from offshore wind at the times of the day when the demand isn't that great. So there's a kind of an ecosystem developing there around hydrogen, which hopefully, based on the research that's out there, will become the component part for the sustainable fuels that you've invested in. So maybe just talk to us just a little bit about that, because I think that's really the future in terms of making aviation sustainable and green friendly.
It's true. I mean, look, the fuel companies at the moment are working on developing sustainable aviation fuels, but the volumes are tiny. They're minuscule. We are investing about €2 million a year with Trinity College, who have had remarkable success in this area, in the environmental area. Some very remarkable genius professors there who are doing work on research into how sustainable aviation fuel is a well-known technology, but research on how do we actually step change up the volume, or the volume that we're looking at. You're building it from algae, and all these other different forms which are way above my pay grade. It can't just be we take wheat out of the ground or rapeseed oil. That's not going to achieve it. So they're doing great work. We actually we're having a sustainability conference tomorrow in Trinity College, in the business school in Trinity College, where we're bringing in the oil companies. Some of our biggest investors are coming to Dublin tonight, and we're going to spend tomorrow in Trinity examining how we can both increase the funding for sustainable aviation fuels, both research and production, and kind of trying to, if you like, infuse both the academic with the financial, and also some of our bigger investors who are there bringing their sustainability, their ESG, their environmental and sustainability governance teams to Dublin, because it's an area, as you rightly say, we have to do much more on.
And I think you are, and it's probably undervalued and under-recognised, and you did talk about in your earlier slides about getting to net zero by 2050. Obviously, this is an important part of that journey. Thanks again. Keep at it.
Thank you, Senator.
And keep an eye on Shannon.
Can I just ask a quick question? Really, the 200 million, the tunnel underneath, you're vehemently opposed to, right? You're very much in favour of a third terminal being built. And it's come up, right? And the argument would be, and I expect your response, but I need to put it anyway, that if you build a third terminal, you're just going to continue to grow Dublin. And you're looking at the other airports. I take your point. We have one airport dominating the eastern seaboard, and we four then all on the western seaboard, making up about 13% of travel flights at the moment. If you build a third terminal, what's the counter argument to say that that's not going to have a further level impact on the other airports, that you're just going to continue to drive this big beast above in Dublin, and effectively, you're verging on a monopoly situation?
Well, I mean, we would happily guarantee that. By the way, a third terminal becomes a very politically sensitive issue. An extension of the existing terminal would do us fine. It is not a pleasant customer experience in the Pier D last summer.
And if we were to do an extension of the existing terminal, right?
Yeah.
What would that cost? Have you an idea of cost?
You could build that readily. The existing Pier D cost, excluding the link building, cost about 120 million, allowing for inflation. You could build a similar wing going north for, we think, less than 200 million.
So you're effectively saying, for the same price of an underground tunnel,
you can have an extension, an extra terminal, which would have stands for aircraft, and that's one of the key capacity issues: is have you got enough stands that aircraft can park on that you can pass
even if you put that in, what's the argument that doesn't develop a big beast that basically puts puts the other airports even at a
Well,
further
the argument is Dublin's already a big beast. It already has a second runway that's underutilised. It doesn't have enough capacity, enough kind of stands or enough terminal capacity to allow us to add more aircraft in Dublin Airport. But we're already growing in Shannon Airport.
Yeah.
We've gone from 2 to 3 based aircraft there. We're talking about going from 2 to 3 based aircraft in Cork. That growth is entirely independent of Dublin, and Dublin's already a big beast. So the two are no longer interchangeable. We're not talking about, if you don't do this, we'll move planes out of Dublin to Shannon, or we'll move them out of Cork to Shannon. Shannon and Cork are growing very successfully.
If they build the extension to the terminal, right?
Won't make any difference at all to Cork and Shannon. As long as the cost base...
How will it improve the experience for the passenger coming through Dublin?
It will create more more terminal and gate space for passengers in Dublin Airport, and that is very badly needed, particularly in Pier D, which is essentially where all of the Ryanair flights go from.
Terminal 2.
Terminal 1, but Pier D in Terminal 1.
Okay, thank you. I'll now move to Deputy Joe Corry. 10 minutes, Deputy Corry.
Thank you very much, Sean.
Deputy, thank you.
I just want to say at the start of my contribution that my wife works for Ryanair in the new maintenance hangar in Shannon. So I just want to press my remarks there at the top. But I just want to, come in.
Exactly.
I don't believe for Christmas.
Okay,
Sure.
He's a good engineer.
But I know it's great, and you can see the impact in Shannon, the wider region, of your decision to invest down there in maintenance, which is fantastic. But also the airport itself, it's a driver of economic activity. It means so much to business, to tourism. And it's just really, you're saying you hope to grow passenger numbers there by another million, which is great. Have you any time frame in relation to that over that period, that 5 years? When do you expect that growth to happen?
I think what you see is that if you looked at the map that we had on the second slide, there's 230 airports, and if Shannon is a base, then it opens up connections with those 230 airports potentially. And then if you've got a framework of a low-cost deal or a national aviation policy, that means that people here in Dublin who the route planning know with certainty that the cost base is going to be set for a number of years. That gives them more certainty and we simply call it out in Ryanair, joining the dots.
Yeah.
So that's all we do in any of the bases or airports, and it's about long-term cost certainty and your track record of what works and what doesn't work, and then you just add it.
And by the way, I would add to that, I would link, it's imperative and be careful here, we're linking this to Ireland successfully, rebalancing environmental taxation across Europe. But if our Irish government joined with other peripheral states around Europe and said we are no longer willing to accept that our passengers pay all of the environmental burden, if our environmental tax came down from €4.50 per passenger to €2 per passenger, we would deliver that additional growth in Shannon and Cork in 3 years from the date that is reduced. You wouldn't even have to wait 5 years. Dublin, because of the scale, it would take longer. We would commit to that additional growth, and it is absolutely it would be the incentive. Shannon is already low cost. Cork is pretty low cost. It is the penalty of the environmental taxes in those peripheral regional airports that is really holding back very aggressive traffic development there now.
Okay. And just say in terms of cost, and you mentioned Cork at one point was charging the same as Dublin. How competitive is Shannon? Is Shannon cheaper than Cork or Dublin?
We don't go into the sort of commercial details of deals in terms of our arrangements there, but like Cork, what I can say is with Cork at the moment is that we're at a very advanced stage with trying to put in some incentives, again giving us the certainty to sort of put that third aircraft potentially back in for next summer, and then having a framework to grow that, and a similar type arrangement you would have in Shannon as well. So it's not like we're going to play one off against the other in terms of that, because we've already committed to the aircraft in Shannon, and we're pretty much there, I would hope, in Cork as well.
Okay.
So.
And just say, you were saying about a fair and balanced environmental charge. and there's an opportunity maybe for Ireland to work with other peripheral countries, you know, the Maltas, the Portugals, the Spains, to try and lobby for that. If you were to design it, like, how would it look? It's just a cheaper charge.
No, I think it would be a fairer charge. If we expect every passenger travelling to and from Europe, whether travelling on long haul or a transfer flight, paid their fare charge, then I would argue the short haul flights, the charge would come down from $4.50 to maybe $2.50. And people continuously misunderstand, it's only €2. Nobody really minds €2. If they didn't mind €2, we'd have taken the €2 off them 25 years ago. They mind 10 cents. Because if they're looking at two attractively priced flights to two alternative destinations, one that has the higher access cost and the other has the lower access cost, an environmental tax, no environmental tax, people move in their hundreds of thousands. It is incredibly price sensitive.
Okay. And you mentioned there that you use 12.5% sustainable aviation
target for 2030.
It's targeted. Okay. And to what extent do you use it at the moment?
We are struggling to get to 1% at the moment.
Okay.
I mean, in some airports it's better. There's a supply in Schiphol. We've done a partnership agreement with Neste. We uplift 40% of our fuel uplifts in Schiphol are sustainable aviation fuels. But we're a small operator in Schiphol.
Where are we at in this country in terms of the provision of sustainable aviation fuel?
Regrettably nowhere. I mean, there's almost no sustainable aviation fuel supply here in Ireland. And again, it's one of the points we would make to government in policy. If government is earning about 140 million a year in environmental taxes directly from air passengers, they should be using that money to promote and supply sustainable aviation fuels at our airports.
If you were the CEO of Shannon Airport, what would you be lobbying for to be in the new aviation policy for Shannon explicitly?
That's kind of I don't understand all of the Shannon is a bigger thing than just the airport. One of the few, in fact, the only upside of Brexit has been the return of duty-free on flights to and from the UK, which is a major. I mean, we've talked to some Italian airports who've seen their commercial income double from €15 spend to €30 spend per passenger. Shannon, Cork and Dublin are benefiting now. If I was in Shannon Airports, I would be doing two things. One, I'd be trying to get the department to lower my costs. I don't know what costs they have that could be lowered. Certainly, I think the costs that they're paying for, I think ATC and some of those others are very high. But I don't know that. I don't know that I'm not independently associated with their business. And I would be trying to ensure that duty-free flights, we get many more duty. One of the reasons why I think there's more growth available from UK to Ireland in the next 3 or 4 years is because duty-free is back on the UK flights. The airports will make more money out of it. We'll sell more cigarettes and booze on board those flights, and we'll all make out a little bit better. I would rather it wasn't there and that the UK returned and became a member of the European Union. But Brexit has been a tragedy that will take 10 years to reverse.
Air traffic control, you've mentioned it, continuously throughout your presentation. How does that affect yourselves? You're losing out on flights, you're wasting time, money, and you're saying there's just a different, regime in every country. Have you made submissions to Europe about this?
Thousands. I mean, the airlines generally made that. I mean, the biggest challenge we have with air traffic control every summer is that there will be air traffic controllers will either not show up to work on a Saturday morning across Europe, or they're not rostered to show up to work. And so why is it always on a Saturday that there's air traffic control restrictions across Europe? We've seen our punctuality on Tuesdays and Wednesdays in the busy summer season will run at about 92-93% because almost all the air traffic controllers show up to work. And on Saturdays and Sundays, particularly after a football match or some sort of, there will be air traffic control slots all over the place. And it's not capacity, it is that people will not show up to work and they will not take a stick to the people who will not show up to work. I mean, we have pilots who are rostered 5 days, they do 5 on, 4 off, but they show up to work on Fridays and Saturdays. If we just got the air traffic controllers just to do that, but they are an incredibly cosseted, tiny band of very overpaid, but very powerful, unionised, each have a national union that can shut down the skies over over their country and over significant parts of the European Union.
Like 9 air traffic controllers went on strike in France in September.
Picketed one of the centre.
And we were told that, and Eurocontrol were told that there wouldn't be disruption. It was a small-scale strike, and it spread with sympathetic action. And we had the worst. Every airline in Europe had the worst day of punctuality, in their history. 50% of flights, less than 50% of flights were on time.
We were forced to cancel 600 flights that day because 9 French air traffic controllers not only went on strike, but then picketed at their 2 different air traffic control centres. That is 600 flights is about 120,000 passengers. We then have to put them up in hotels. We have to pay their right to care. We then have to provide them with refunds, if they can't do it. And we're under EU law. It says we're allowed to recover our costs from whoever caused the delays. Except every national ATC provider has national protection from being sued, so we're stuck in the middle. Now we would rather not be stuck in the middle. We'd rather not have the delays in the first place. And in actual fact, what could happen is in a single European sky, if the French want to go on strike and they can't provide the services, we call Ireland, you provide the services across France that day, not a bother, off you go. There's no such thing as an air traffic controller strike in North America. Well, they do occasionally go on strike, but they are, Reagan fired them all. Now, I'm saying that is not the solution. Reagan fired them all in 1980, but they're federal employees, so they're not allowed to go on strike. They do have, there are many other solutions here. Binding arbitration before you go on strike. Many times French air traffic controllers go on strike not because they want more pay, it's because they don't like Macron or they didn't like the result of the football match, or it's recreational striking. All of the strikes generally take place on Fridays, and then they don't show up to work on the Saturdays, so they have a 3-day weekend. Nobody will tackle this across Europe, but we are the ones telling our passengers, I'm very sorry, your flight to Italy is cancelled because 9 guys in France are on strike.
Thanks very much, guys.
And just a quick thing there, you made reference. Since Brexit, how has that impacted on your business travels over and back to the UK? And you made reference, Michael, to that you think 10 years, Brexit will take 10 years to unravel. Do you believe that in the UK, that effectively they will reverse Brexit in time?
No, I think even in the vast majority of people in the UK accept that Brexit has not been a success. I wouldn't want to say discuss it as a failure. Has not been a success. It has caused untold damage to the UK economy. The problem is you still have a lot of the Brexiteers are still in senior positions in the Tory party. I think what will happen in the most immediate impact of Brexit on us has been incredible restrictions in the labour market in the UK. We want to bring in, we're a high pay, we pay our cabin crew above retail, above hospitality, above agriculture, so we've never had any difficulty getting people. But lots of UK kids don't want to work as cabin crew anymore. So we would bring in Italians or Portuguese or in some cases Poles or Irish people, kids would go over and do that. We are no longer allowed to bring them in. We can apply for visas, and it was remarkable last year. We were applying for visas for cabin crew in Stansted. The Home Office would give us visas for Moroccans and Turks faster than they would get. In fact, they wouldn't give us visas for Portuguese, Italians. If you had a European passport, they wouldn't give you a visa. Just irrational.
And what do you
stuff.
think the way it will unravel?
What will happen, I think, what is inevitable in my mind in the next 12 or 18 months is that the UK will do a trade deal with the European Union. I think that is the only way that you'll solve the Northern Ireland Protocol. It is insoluble unless you have a trade deal. And a trade deal, some kind of sensible trade deal between the UK and the European Union would have to see the Northern Ireland Protocol go away. Northern Ireland economy is benefiting hugely from being in the EU but not in the EU. The unionists have a huge problem with it. You can understand the political difficulty they have. But normally, as Clinton on a number of different, it's always about the economy stupid. And it is an unanswerable case that the UK, if isolationism worked, North Korea would be the world's most successful economy. It isn't. And the UK cannot be Europe's most successful economy by being isolationist and doing stupid trade deals with Australia.
So you see a trade deal?
A trade deal will be done.
I think it will be
very... I think in 10 years the UK will probably want to rejoin, maybe not the European Union, but a wider EU. Remember, we estimate about half of the people who voted for Brexit have died since. There was a huge majority of the over 80s were voting for Brexit, and a huge majority under 30s were voting to remain. the demographics will fix this in the next.
But fundamentally, you see that a trade deal will be done between the UK and the EU.
And the European Union. It is
common sense will prevail.
Common sense. And to be fair, I think with Sunak and maybe Jeremy Hunt, and you have more common sense people at the top there. But you saw last week when, the Treasury were talking about having a trade deal and, more freedom of labour between, straight away the Telegraph and the Mail and all the lunatics were jumping up and down demanding commitments. Generally speaking, and when voters vote at election, they generally vote on the economy, and I would hope that some sort of sense, some common sense will prevail.
I'll now move to Deputy James O'Connor. Deputy O'Connor, 10 minutes.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much to Mr. O'Leary and Mr. Wilson. And look, it's good to hear that you're in negotiations with Cork Airports. As a fellow Corkonian, Mr. O'Leary, I'm delighted to see that you're recovering in Cork, and post-COVID, there's exceptional leadership there at the airport through Neil McCarthy and his colleagues, and I just want to say that. I am on the record, I suppose, of this committee of having a serious issue with the DAA over their handling of what's gone on in Terminal 1 around the capacity restraints there. So I want to hit off that first, and I just want to put on record, I met them, I think, around the 8th of October about Terminal 1 in Dublin Airport, about the tunnel that's been very much discussed here today, and I have not got an official response yet from that meeting, and I know this is something we're looking at putting on the work programme as well, Chairperson. Yeah. But I want to get a better insight what Ryanair's view and position is. According to the DAA, they don't have any intention of putting up any major infrastructure in terms of terminal infrastructure, extension of piers, so on and so forth, until 2029. And if you were to take the figures from 2019 of around 33 million, they're going to hit those figures again next year if the economy remains relatively stable, which was already in excess of the statutory cap at the airport. So what's Ryanair telling the government, what their view is about that gap effectively between 29 and 2023, where they're going to be effectively trying to run a cattle mart there with the level of passengers they intend to put through Terminal 1. I have to say I've flown through it many, many times with Ryanair. I love flying with Ryanair, very simple, and I always use the airline. But the experience of Terminal 1 is awful, and I just want to get your perspective on that, around that gap effectively.
I think we would share those views and that sentiment. I mean, I think, Dublin Airport has an extraordinary opportunity now that it has opened a second runway. There are certain planning restrictions that we would want to see eased, but having a second runway there is infrastructure that will serve Ireland well for the next 50 years. They do not have sufficient terminal capacity. I mean, it was unsafe. What was going on in Pier D and in the old Pier A this year, in Terminal 1 this summer, wasn't safe. Huge overcrowding. And we're trying to get flights out as quickly as we can. Very difficult for passengers to get to their aircraft. We need an extension of that Pier D. The only way it can extend is up in front of the old hangars, and we've been calling on the Dublin Airport to develop that for probably the last 2 or 3 years. It can be done in the next 2 or 3 years. The money is there to do it. You just divert the 200 million you're proposing to waste on a tunnel and put it there and develop the passenger facilities that need to be built there. You have to move some of the old hangars. They can go over to the west side because the aircraft can move across a taxiway without any difficulty.
That's an interesting point of conversation, is around the moving of those hangars. In terms of who has them at the moment, what could happen with them? Could they go to Shannon? Could they go to Cork? It's the state position.
We've got to be very careful. I mean, we have 2 of those hangars. We'd happily move them in the morning. Those hangars would have to be rebuilt over on the west apron somewhere. But we need those hangars there. They do the maintenance of. We have 37 aircraft based in Dublin Airport. Conor McCarthy's firm, Dublin Aerospace, has one of the large ones there. It can move quite readily. They do contract maintenance. I mean, that could move to Shannon, but that's a matter for that company. The facility is there. Hangar 6, the legendary Hangar 6, which is largely empty because it's not used very much, that doesn't have to move at all because the building would never go down as far as Hangar 6. So very little disruption would take place. And the advantage of building something on that north apron is actually you can access it from the existing multi-storey car parks. You would be going across. Like my problem originally with Pier 2 or Terminal 2 was it was always built in a cul-de-sac. Down in the wrong place, and you can't kind of walk easily between the 2 terminals.
Yes, and where does Ryanair, Mr O'Leary, see the DAA and Dublin Airport in particular hitting crisis point, effectively where the level of passengers with the current growth trajectory hits a point where it's just not going to be sustainable the way that, effectively we go back to what we had during COVID where there was huge queues, so on and so forth?
Yeah, Dublin Airport is going to face, I don't use emotive language like crisis point. Dublin Airport, the passenger experience in Dublin Airport is going to be suboptimal, certainly in Terminal 1, which is Pier A and Pier D, through the summer of 2023 and probably again in the summer of 2024. With very little additional growth, and we already plan to deliver additional growth in 23 and 24.
And into the later 2020s, you do not see a situation.
The barrier to growth at Dublin Airport will actually be terminal capacity. There's simply we would be willing to put another 2, 3, 4 aircraft into Dublin Airport, but there's nowhere to park them. And if we can't park them on a stand, get them in and out, we will not bus passengers around airports.
The statutory remit of the DAA as well is to turn a profit for the state, and obviously any profits they make have to come back to the coffers of the Department of Public Expenditure and Financing. But what I want to get a sense from you, what you're discussing here today will obviously require a very significant amount of capital, irrespective of whether they decide to move the 200 pool that's allocated for the tunnel. There's going to be a lot more money required to do some of the works at the airport for the additional capacity. But there's also this other side of the argument that the DAA have to essentially make a profit. Do you have a concern at the moment of the structure of how the DAA is set up, in the sense that the state is nearly required to take money from it, irrespective of whether or not they have difficult decisions to make about capital infrastructure, of course within the remit of the fact that they can't get state money directly because of EU rules, because the airport's over 3 million passengers. My understanding is they can't get direct infrastructure grants the same as what Shannon and Cork benefited hugely from. What's your perspective on that statutory remit of the organisation when it comes to getting the infrastructure built that we need?
Well, look, statutory remits are a movable feast, as we know around, certainly in this building. The DA has a number of different remits. There is an overriding ministerial instruction to the regulator here, the CAR, which is that in any determination, the financial viability of Dublin Airport takes precedence over everything else. So I wouldn't worry too much about Dublin Airport. It's not going to struggle. It is hugely profitable. They waste huge amounts of money building stuff that is not necessary and that we don't need or want. They keep digging up the same concrete. They will dig up concrete on the ramp that they poured 3 years ago, 5 years ago. They're always repairing some concrete. They spend money prodigiously, sadly usually in the wrong places. And I don't want to rehash Terminal 2. They spent nearly $2 billion on Terminal 2. And yet only managed to deliver about 12 additional Pier Serve stands. They've since had to kind of convert the old cargo building so Aer Lingus could put more stands over there, and Aer Lingus have to bus their passengers out to that. I mean, having spent $2 billion, it's a disgrace what they built there. But, you come back to these choices again. Do you really want to spend the next 200 million building a tunnel under a taxiway that nobody needs, or do you want to spend the 200 million building increased facilities for passengers? You'd also have increased duty-free shopping, increased restaurants. There's lots of money. It is self-financing. The big cost at an airport that is difficult to finance is runways. Now, they've managed to build a second runway. They don't need to build another runway for the next 100 years. But what they now need to do is to build very efficient, low-cost terminal facilities so that we can lower costs and we can add more flights at lower access airfares for Ireland's connectivity and grow, as we've set out here, an ambitious programme of growing from 36 million or from 38 million passengers to 57 million passengers over the next 5 or 6 years.
Okay. Just another question I have, a bit left field now, but I want to get a sense from you. Obviously, this is the first time we've had a ministerial role, specifically in aviation, with a super junior capacity. But, you effectively have aviation sharing a department with another cabinet minister who would say wouldn't be the most supportive of aviation from an emissions point of view. How do you think that's working in the government? We're coming up now to the 17th of December. We have a reformed cabinet, new government, and a new Taoiseach. And in terms of the decisions that government will need to take to protect aviation for continued growth in the sector and looking at opportunities like the sustainable fuel, what do you think is needed from a government point of view to give you the protection at the cabinet table you need? My
personal view is we're an island on the periphery of Europe. I don't think aviation, which is vital to our connectivity, should be a junior ministry. I don't think the split of aviation but then I'm not sure that I would necessarily agree with having transport subsumed into a Department of the Environment and as well. It seems to me transport should be with tourism, and the environment should be separate. Like transport belongs with tourism. I don't know why
so you think
transport
aviation
and
that those should be separate, or that should be under one person, a cabinet?
It seems to me that should be, access to and from this peripheral Ireland should be a senior cabinet position. Having said that, I do want to compliment the junior minister who, when we had the baggage crisis at Dublin Airport, was sent out in very difficult circumstances to lead the government response to it, and led it very well. Eddie had frequent meetings with her. I had a number of Zoom interactions with her, and I would pay credit to the work she did.
That's very good.
But I would call into question why it was devolved to a junior minister to deal with that, when the senior minister should have been front and centre of it.
Okay, no, that's just interesting to get your perspective. Yeah. That's very interesting. I think, just in conclusion, just to say that obviously it is great to have you here. From a Cork point of view, I think it's great to see that you're looking at the potential for an additional basing of an aircraft. And look, we want to wish you continued success. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy.
Now, the Deputy Duncan Smith. Deputy Smith, 10 minutes.
Deputy.
For coming today. Just we'll continue on the tunnel in Dublin Airport. The DEA would pride itself as being quite, profitable, professional, forward-thinking, well-planned, and all the rest. Do you think you're saying they're wasting 200 million on this? Now they're saying that there's a safety element to this. There's 3,500 vehicle movements that they take off the tarmac, and that this is backed up by the safety regulator. Do you think there's any credibility to that argument, or to that call? And surely,
none whatsoever. I'm sure there's a consultant's report that they paid for that justifies why you need to waste.
But they do seem like the DEA. I represent Dublin Fingal. I was a Swords councillor, so I've been getting their bump through the door for years. So they're very growth orientated, it would seem to me, would be only chomping at the bit to add another pier or another terminal to improve capacity. So why are they not doing it?
Because there is a degree of regulatory gaming going on in the system. How do you get the charges up? You persuade the car that we have to commit to these huge capital expenditure projects that are vital from a safety point of view, in actual fact, and you come up with rubbish like a 200 million tunnel under a taxiway.
But surely the DA would value...
Sorry, go ahead.
Surely the DA would value profitability over increased charges. And if you're laying out, as you've done continually for many years, growth plans for Dublin Airport if you were given the scope to do so. So surely the DA would be like, right, we'd be better off doing that, because ultimately our bottom line will improve and we'll be able to reinvest, etc. So it just doesn't add up as to why...
If you have you're a regulated monopoly, and Heathrow is the same. Heathrow's response to the COVID crisis was to put up charges by 50%. If you're a regulated monopoly, the easier way for you to make more profit is to get the regulator to increase your charges and then say, well, sorry, we just have to charge higher prices because of all this vital infrastructure we have. If you live in the private sector, I have to spend 20 billion in the next 5 years buying 200 new aircraft. I can't go to anybody to ask me, can I put up my prices because I'm spending 20 billion on new aircraft? I don't have any consultant's report justifying it. I have to live within my means and try and fill those aircraft. And I know of no other airport in Europe and I can find no other example of an airport in Europe that isn't a regulated monopoly, that would come up with a crazy plan to tunnel under an existing taxiway that you can drive across quite readily and spend 200 million doing it. But you must understand too, the DAA is a big beast. There is a huge infrastructure within the middle managers of the DAA of architects and planners and developers and project managers who will all be out of jobs if you can't keep this kind of feeding this monster.
But surely those architects could just as easily be served building another pier. But my point is this: when the DAA are in here, and they're in here regularly enough, they will say we operate in the marketplace. In terms of we operate in the private sector, we have to turn a profit. And Dalton Phillips would have a very private sector kind of view to me at least. So again, just for me, it doesn't add up that they wouldn't want to. And this friction that continues to exist between the DAA and Ryanair, is it resolvable? It's not good surely it's not good for Ireland that this is continual friction. It can't just be about airport charges all the time. But it just seems for decades, since I was in my teens that this has been going on, Ryanair versus DAA versus Ryanair versus the DAA. I mean, it's not. The two ultimate good news stories, if you want to look at it from a purely economic perspective there, but
but I think again, don't get caught up in the kind of PR. We have worked successfully with the DA over a number of years. We have grown to be by far and away their largest competitor. We have delivered them growth in years when their other large airline has seen traffic decline. I mean, it's a bit like a marriage. You fight occasionally with your partner, but you kiss and make up and find a way of working your way. You usually do what she tells you. But and I think that's the way we should naturally have we should have a tension with the Dublin
tension's
airport.
Quite public though all the time, and maybe the kissing and making up is in private.
I don't think we hold new route launches with Dublin Airport. We had a very good relationship with Dalton Phillips. I mean, when we were very supportive of Dublin Airport, we could have been out there last April, May and June when they had the baggage crisis, castigating them. We told you this is a rubbish public sector. We didn't. We said, look, we need solutions. Call in the army. We'll go up and they wanted us. We said we'll open our check-in desks earlier. We paid our people more to come in early. We checked in bags the night before. On the ground, we have very good relations with the DAA. It's not us that came up with the plan to spend 200 million on a tunnel. That's a DAA proposal. We challenged the proposal, and we're happy to debate it, whether it's here or somewhere else. We're not in here just taking pot shots at the DAA. But if you ask us to put together what's a sensible, forward-looking aviation policy for Ireland, it is lower charges in Shannon and Cork, so we allow us to grow, and stop wasting money at Dublin Airport. We don't say don't spend 200 million. We just say please spend 200 million on extending the passenger facility, which is where we need it. And if you want to build a tunnel under, do it in 10 years' time.
They're probably not mutually. It shouldn't be mutually exclusive. And I want to see the airport thrive because I want to see workers with well-paid jobs in the airport being able to live locally as they have done and continue to grow towns like Swords and that as they have done over the years. And that's where I'm coming from. Just in terms of one of your open statement, the move towards lower cost airports. Now we had an issue. It's been well documented in this meeting and others about how the standards collapsed in Dublin Airport for a couple of months this year. And you mentioned then in a subsequent contribution that they'd be suboptimal by 2023. How do we get in your view, how do you get the balance between a lower cost airport, in your view, equaling a poorer customer experience and that? Because I feel like just generally the success of Ryanair, particularly in driving lower cost fares, has fed into lower cost airports, which ultimately is a bad thing because the experience in airports with poor toilet facilities, lack of coffee facilities, just generally queuing from when you get out of the car or bus to when you get onto your plane.
Sure.
So there has to be a balance there. It can't just be a shed that we process people through.
There absolutely is. Just put it in anyway. Yeah. Remember, Dublin Airport wasn't the only airport this summer where the terminal experience was terrible. It was terrible in Heathrow. It was
Indeed,
terrible in
Schiphol.
It was everywhere.
Yeah.
The airports fundamentally did not line up recruitment sufficiently, and some of them, had, in difficult areas where low-cost employment is difficult. Most airports around Europe made a mess of the recruitment this year. Security, cleaning, terminal, it was awful. I worry more, though, at Dublin Airport. Dublin Airport is more profitable now than it was 5 years ago. They did build Pier D. But we have filled Pier D. We say we want to continue to grow at Dublin Airport. You need another Pier D or extend the existing Pier D. Don't build a new terminal. Don't go off and do something silly. Just extend that. Replicate exactly what you did before. We know what it cost before was 120 million. This one will cost about 160, 180 million. Do that. And then we're all agreed. That will be a better experience because there will be more gates for passengers, there will be more seating area for passengers, there will be a little bit more retail, restaurant for passengers, but they're short at the moment, without having to walk another mile to get there because actually you're just extending what you're already there. Sorry.
I think this idea that travel has become routine for everybody, right? And all this talk about airport experience, people don't want to go to airports. They want to get through, they want to get in and out of them as quickly as possible. So they now value things like people got used to arriving about an hour before their flight or an hour and 15 minutes on the assumption they were going to get through security. It's only when the carousel stopped during COVID that people realised, geez, that's what an airport is about. But airports will have you believe that it's all about the shopping experience or it's all about what I mean, if you look back at the track record, you don't have this perfect knowledge on what the right airport to build. We all knew at that time when they were building Terminal 2, when you put two buildings and you put a narrow way across, that you were never going to be able to move those facilities around. So we knew what we were talking about then. We're the customers. We want to get people through as quickly as possible. And if there's a good airport experience as they make their way through, and if it's as basic as coffee shops, toilets, and a
They're the basics I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the Toblerones. I'm talking about the basics.
Yeah, the basics.
That's the thing.
But the basics came into focus during COVID.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's been 5 years since Ryanair has recognised trade unions and has been engaging with them. How has that impacted on the culture of the organisation from your view? And what are your thoughts on that? And do you think you could have and should have done it earlier?
I think that, and I did most of the negotiations with the unions. I think what happened was that everything changes and nothing changes because we have a particular business model. And a lot of the comment about what Ryanair was supposed to be doing or whatever, you can't have 22 billion US dollars worth of aircraft in Ryanair, not be paying people correctly and at the right pay to service those aircraft. So we were doing all that right anyway. When we went through the negotiations with unions, gradually, with those agreements that came in, people realised that if you are a 737 pilot in Shannon, and there's nobody else in Shannon with a 737, and you can live like 2 miles down the road, you've got the best job in aviation if you want to live in Shannon or in Cork or Pescara or wherever it is. And those people equally will know that you can't have, you've got to work the rosters that a low-cost airline works and have the sustainability and employment. And then gradually common sense came through on that. And we have largely the same agreements. We go through consultation pretty much in the same way. And it has taken a lot more resources for us to get to the same to get to the same input, because people have well-paid jobs, promotions, growth, and they have a good chance that we're going to, if we don't already have an airport in their backyard, we're going to have one quite soon. So it is one of the best jobs you can have in aviation from an employment perspective.
And as a person who was the most virulently opposed to unionisation for 20 years in Ryanair, I think the last 5 years have demonstrated that we've learned from the unions, but the unions have also learned from us. We went through COVID, which was an existential crisis. We didn't fire everybody, which is what most of our unionised competitors did. We kept people employed. We did agree pay cuts with pilots, cabin crew, engineers, across the board, because it was the only way we were going to survive through that, but we kept everybody current. We also then put in place a 5-year pay deals that actually involved pay restoration plus agreed pay increases over the next couple of years. And they've been agreed, as Eddie said, with over 90% of our people. So we have learned to work with unions. The unions have learned to work with us. We will not put up with some of the nonsense that they go on with, but thankfully they go on with very little nonsense, and they will equally say they won't put up with a lot of the nonsense I go on with, but I've learned that maybe a little less nonsense out of me goes a long way too. So I think it's not about we've learned, and I think we have a very good, but business-like working relationships with 90% of our unions, and the Irish pilots are still the only ones who haven't agreed a restoration. And we hope maybe, as a result of the WRC intervention next week, that we'll get that done. We would like to restore their pay before Christmas. All we've said to them is, we'll restore the pay the minute you agree to the same sort of pay deals as all of your pilot colleagues across Europe have agreed to. What's not to like?
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you,
loads more, but I've run out of time. Thank you. I know, yeah. No, thanks.
Just before, can I just go through? You're investing 22 billion in new aircraft.
Yep.
Over what period of time is that?
Between now and the end of 2025.
That's over the next 3 years.
3 years. Well, the first we've invested the first probably we have 71 aircraft in already. That's over 7 billion. There's another 50, well, hopefully 51 aircraft by next summer. There'll be another 5 billion. So
in terms, and you have 189 aircraft at the moment, am I correct?
500. Well, we've 189 seats in the aircraft at the moment, but we've 520 aircraft at the moment.
Yeah. How many aircraft in total do you have at the moment?
About 520 aircraft at the moment, and that will rise to about 670 aircraft by the summer of 2026.
And just out of interest, in terms of the aircraft, so your aircraft at the moment, the 520, and going up then by another 140 by summer of 2026. In terms of the aircraft you're replacing, in layman's terms, what are you doing? Are you bringing in the type of aircraft you're changing?
Our core fleet, Cathaoirleach, is, we have, I'll get the number slightly wrong, but we have about 470 737NG aircraft, the oldest of which dates from about 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
Gradually replacing the older of those aircraft with new 737NGs, the MAX aircraft, which are 197-seat aircraft.
And the 22 billion, how many aircraft does that involve?
But 210. So it's over $110 million a plane.
And of the current, we'll say 520, assuming that the 140 will be included in the 210, the new ones that are coming on stream, that leaves you with we'll say that another 210, 140. You're bringing in, you're probably the bones of what, about 80 planes. The question I suppose I'm asking is the 520, 80 of those will be new, and then you're probably about 480 of those old. Tell me about, are they all able to deal with the new fuel and all that?
Yes. There's a misunderstanding in some quarters that sustainable aviation fuel is something different. Actually, all it is, it gets mixed in with jet kerosene.
So for the layperson out there, the existing aircraft.
Yeah.
So why are you then replacing, we'll say, so many aircraft? Is that the norm in your industry?
Well, no, we're not replacing that many. I mean, we're taking out gradually we're growing very rapidly. We're growing at the moment by typically 10, 15 million passengers a year. So most of the new aircraft deliveries are for new growth, new routes. But we also have to keep the fleet on, the average age of the fleet is currently about 7 years old. We want to keep that, the average age down below 10. Yeah. We're growing so strongly at the moment, we're retiring fewer older aircraft than we had originally planned to.
And you went back to your point, you said that the new sustainable fuel, why is there so little of that being produced in Ireland?
It's because at the moment, most of the production is being driven by the major oil companies, Shell, BP, and others. You're generally then converting your food, so crops, rapeseed.
So how do we get to a point where Ryanair will be able to fuel up on all sustainable fuels and have access to it?
All would be difficult. I mean, we would need the government to, and I was come back to, the government to actually apply pressure to create more investment in people who will actually, farmers, for example, selling rapeseed oil and those other products that would produce sustainable aviation fuel.
So if that doesn't happen, how does Ryanair get to its, you're talking about zero emissions by 2050, and you're talking about by 2030,
12.5%.
12.5%.
12.5% is the more challenging target in that.
So how do you get to that? If
we are working actively with fuel suppliers, and we're having a
conference tomorrow. Yeah.
So OMV, Neste, Shell tomorrow, BP. We are doing major plans. We have to work with the fuel companies to produce that volume. But if we take all of the sustainable aviation fuel production across Europe at the moment, it would power less than 1% of our flights.
So is it fair to say, as part of the aviation strategy, you would like to see the Irish government taking a more proactive role in encouraging and promoting this area?
And subsidising it, taking the environmental taxes in and subsidising, because at the moment...
what about the other countries in Europe? Are you getting any...
Oh, yeah, I mean, the Dutch, for example, are subsidising sustainable aviation fuel, so it trades at exactly the same price as jet fuel. Now, they're using some of their environmental revenues for that. And Ireland, the Irish government should be doing the same.
Can I just add on to that? Sorry. I mean, on sustainable aviation fuel, I mean, you can turn that piece of wood into sustainable aviation fuel if you have enough energy to do it. What you've got to do here is that, and some of the comment is misinformed. It is a blend that goes in, so that there won't be any trucks going around with sustainable aviation fuel written on the side. They will all be done at the refinery. It'll come from diverse sources, from food fats, from restaurants, and you've got to have that infrastructure in place. And that's some of the work that Trinity College is doing to say, where's that going to come from? Because that will all ultimately go through the same infrastructure, through the same pipes.
Is the work you're doing with Trinity, is that feeding into government policy?
We hope
Not
it
yet,
will.
but I mean, we think it will educate government policy going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I've 3 non-members, so I'm going to go with 5 minutes each. We have to be out here by 12:30, and I'll try and bring in members at the end for very brief. So first up, I'm going with Deputy Matt Shanahan, Deputy Michael McNamara, and Senator John Cummins in that order. Deputy Shanahan.
Thanks, Chair. And welcome to Michael and Eddie. I had business dealings with you, Michael, over 20 years ago. You hardly remember, but anyway, you haven't lost any of your forthrightness, I can say, in the interim, right?
You haven't lost your Waterford accent.
And Eddie would know I was on the COVID committee, and we certainly lobbied hard for the aviation sector, and I'm a big supporter.
And we're very grateful for the support we received.
Yeah, of the aviation sector. Just with respect to, I noticed your comments, Michael, just in terms of the aspirations of Ryanair to continue to develop the short-haul sector, and that Ireland represents 8% of your overall business dynamic at the moment. With respect to Waterford Airport expansion, I've obviously been a big and strong supporter of that. I note your comments. I don't think it's helpful at this time to have a debate about where that's going to come. There's private investment to happen there. There's a lot of diligence and a lot of business analysis going on there. And I think that will come down to a commercial proposition, obviously, in the future. But what I would say to you is that I think that there is a lot of people who, and we've been speaking about the dysfunction of the DAA airport, say, well, you have. I say, we've been listening, but this will not be a DAA-managed airport. And I think there will be opportunity. And I hope that Ryanair will come back to the base from where it started. It's absolutely fantastic rise. Just could I go to the issue of the European regulation, because I think this is really at the heart of where the committee needs to be as well. And you stated the activities there that overflights cannot happen during a strike situation, and you've outlined how that impacted the airline this year. The inability of the EU to look at designating the upper and lower airspaces for direct flights and how that would impact on fuel usage, and also having an homogeneous ATC platform system. So I suppose the question I'm asking from as an Oireachtas member and maybe as an ad hoc member to this committee today, how can Irish Oireachtas members pressure the EU in this situation? You've spoken about vested interest and the political lobbies that don't want that to happen, but how can we as legislators here push that agenda? Justin, I would ask you one more thing after that, please.
2 things that come in. What can Oireachtas members do? We can apply, this committee can apply pressure or ask the Department of Transport why we're not pushing these buttons. Ireland does have a disproportionate weight in Europe, particularly when we're having discussions about environmental taxation on aviation. We are a peripheral island. We do not have alternatives that the Dutch, the Belgians, the Germans, the French have to travel internationally. We are not willing to accept any more of these disproportionate and unfair taxes. In fact, we want the taxes rebalanced so that all the rich people on long-haul flights or the Dutch people on transfer flights pay their fair share. That is what this committee and this Oireachtas can deliver. And then we will deliver the rest. Can I come back briefly just to Waterford Airport? And since I'm on the record on the matter, I have been asked by the new investor Waterford, will we fly to Waterford? I said we will. If they have a jet runway and a low-cost base, we will certainly return to Waterford. We will certainly put a service from London back into Waterford. But I genuinely fear, and I have spoken to some of the private investors, to say, please do not invest in Waterford Airport, because the viability of Waterford Airport will be very, very challenging. And I do not want to see, with the greatest will in the world, another set of PSOs for another set of domestic flights from Waterford to Dublin or something else that will only survive for as long as the taxpayer keeps egregiously subsidising it. So we wish Waterford Airport well. We'll be very happy to fly there, but it will be its viability will be super challenging.
Well, look, I think, as I said, this will come down to the commercial realities on the ground, and we'll have to wait and see where all of that goes. There is significant private investment. The taxpayer is not going to be on the hook for major money, and the taxpayer has certainly put major money into other aspects of regional aviation and nothing into Waterford. So what's going in there will be a drop in the ocean, to be frank about it. Just in terms of that European regulation, you said that 20% of fuel would be saved by this direct flying, and you said 90% of flight delays would be removed. Now, surely, has the European Union not taken that on board? If those stats are correct, and I mean, there's a massive implication there in terms of carbon reduction. at the very outset. How has that not been able to be pressed at a European level?
Those statistics aren't even questioned. Everybody accepts those as statistics. The reality is, though, you now have to go, instead of the European Commission is not a very robust organisation anymore. We have a transport commissioner who is very well, but she's a Romanian lady. She means well. But you're asking her to go up against Macron and say, we're going to break up the French Air Traffic Control Union or the Germans. We're going to break up that union. We're going to remove the power of the unions, not by taking away by blocking their ability to shut down the skies over Europe. They're free to go on strike, but when they go on strike, it will be French consumers who will take the hit. Nobody in the European Commission wants to challenge the French government or the German government, even if it's in the interests of the vast and overwhelming majority of European citizens and passengers. What we find remarkable is how little traction we've made as an industry on the environmental argument in favour of the single European sky. I mean, the environmental argument, and the environment is number 1, 2 and 3. It's a cult in Brussels at the moment, as any of you who have been to Brussels will know, has made no traction whatsoever. When it comes to saving the environment or protecting a very small number of very powerful French ATC air traffic controllers, the environment loses.
Thanks.
There could be a long-term answer to this as well. I mean, it's not just about eliminating air traffic control in those countries. They could do it over a period of time, run down the amount of air traffic controllers as they went into one system, pay those people out until retirement. They could do that as well, but that takes a coherent policy, which they're not willing to take. And only, as Michael says, a strengthened and emboldened European Commission can do something like that.
Thanks. Just can I make a note, Chair? There are two they're not large. One is a very large company owned by a Dublin concern, a European concern in terms of ethanol production, which is trying to be doing blending for a number of years. The other is down in Laois, which has been doing a plastics to fuel blended business. I was involved with that for a number of years. I wish you luck, but I'd like to put you in touch with those guys and see in terms of what you're doing in terms of Trinity College, and they may have something like that. Yeah.
The more supply of sustainable fuels, the better.
Yeah.
From whatever sources.
Thank you, Deputy Shannon. Now move to Deputy Michael McNamara. 5 minutes, Deputy McNamara.
I listened carefully to the whole thing, but there's a slight contradiction maybe in some of what you said. You repeatedly stressed that in order for Shannon and Cork to grow, that they needed to be cheaper than Dublin, or at least as cheap as it. You also talked about, or at least Eddie Wilson did a couple of minutes ago, this people want to get in and get out quickly out of an airport. I mean, there was a marked contrast between Shannon and Dublin this summer. You were queuing for hours in Dublin, you were through Shannon in 10 minutes, you could have a pint or read a poem or do the downward dog or whatever you wanted to do before you got on your flight. Does Shannon have to be cheaper in those circumstances? You talked about your friend from Nina who used to fly from Shannon, now flies from Dublin, and the impact of roads. But roads go in two directions, and even at the best of times in Dublin you have, if you're going at rush hour, you have traffic jams right up the M7, and to the extent that some people have even bought taxi licences to avoid those traffic jams. So, I mean, is the hinterland for Shannon growing and getting closer to Dublin, particularly during rush hour, or does it simply not matter to people? They just look at the price and they'll put up with whatever hassle they have to put up with to get a flight for a five or less?
You see, I think we've got to be careful to recall what happened last summer. Dublin Airport was grim through April, May and into June, but through July, August, September, actually it was pretty good, and security, we got there in the end. There is no doubt in my mind that Shannon and Cork were direct beneficiaries last summer. Families who I know said, I'm not going to Dublin Airport, we'll go to Shannon, we'll get the flight to Reyes or with the flight board. It was very good for both Cork and Shannon. It has been helpful to the growth of Cork, and Cork and Shannon are both growing at the moment. We're talking to both airports about additional aircraft. But you've got to start off with the first principles. 60% of the traffic in Dublin is inbound, and it's inbound because it wants to go to Dublin. And, there's no way you can change that. You take the big nationalities, the UK all want to come to Dublin. They will travel around the rest of the country. You get more of the Italians, the Germans and the French will want to. There's a bit of that will go to the west of Ireland. They will use more Cork and Shannon. But you can't make it as you would wish it to be just by wishing it. If there is more traffic there who want to go to Cork and Shannon, don't worry, we'll carry it. And we are working very closely with Mary Constantine, the team in Shannon, and Neil McCarthy, the team in Cork. They've done great work. Cork and Shannon, but I was asked, what's the future for Cork and Shannon? They must be materially cheaper than Dublin Airport. There is no other way. But they are, I'm pleased to say, both growing independently of Dublin at the moment, while Dublin is recovering and growing as well. And there is growth available for everybody there. But it is not, you're not going to kind of restrict Dublin and people will go to Shannon and Cork. If you restrict Dublin, people will go to Oslo or Vienna or somewhere else.
Accommodation costs, I mean, obviously people fly to go to different parts of the country and people are impacted by costs. I mean, a large proportion of the hotel beds in Clare at the moment are not available to tourists. Yeah. It has to be a government priority to provide alternative accommodation for the people who, through no fault of their own, are in those beds now. If that doesn't happen and there's a shortage of hotel beds, which will drive up the cost of the existing beds, do you think that will impact upon tourism in the long term? And sorry, I have one other question while I have time. You've talked a lot about sustainable aviation fuel. Have you any realistic hope for hydrogen? I know Elon Musk has said no, but he said it's a lot of things. He's one of the, yeah.
I mean, hydrogen, possibly there may well be a commercial hydrogen engine availability, but we're talking 2040 to 2050. There's nothing on the horizon before 2040. The aircraft we're buying now will be flying from 2028 through till 2045. There is no hydrogen technology at the moment. Rolls-Royce and EasyJet did a test on a test cell this week. There will be no hydrogen, and I'm not sure whether hydrogen, given it, it's a very flammable gas. There will be challenges, but certainly not in I would like to say, career in the aviation business. I'd probably go as far as say not in my lifetime am I going to see hydrogen, but that's probably too far away. And the other point, I forgot the first point.
Just accommodation and cost.
Accommodation but by the way, accommodation is a huge challenge in Ireland, but accommodation is a huge challenge in the UK, all over Europe. I mean, and I'm not I don't want to get into the housing crisis. Hotel accommodation is under extreme pressure. There's lots of hotels that closed down during COVID. Some of that capacity in Spain and Italy hasn't come back. There are Ukrainian refugees in some of that accommodation all over Europe. It is a real challenge. And it is something, that I don't have an immediate or a quick, ready solution to that in the next year or two. I think accommodation and the price of accommodation is going to be a huge challenge. I come back to the Deputy Smith from Swords. I mean, be in no doubt accommodation for our staff in areas like Swords and Shannon and Cork is a real challenge for us as well.
Just driving Airbnbs out of the market is mooted by some as a solution. I mean, it might provide more accommodation for your staff, but less for your customers. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Honestly, we're not in a position in this country. I would not drive Airbnb out of the marketplace. We need accommodation from all sources. I would be encouraging the government as best we can to encourage Airbnb. There are lots of spare bedrooms in lots of houses all over the country that could be converted into Airbnbs pretty quickly if we could use that the technology. We are short. I mean, our population has risen to 5 million people. It's going to 6 million people, I think, in the next 10 years, and then it's going to 8 million people. None of the solutions we're talking about now, fiddling around with the tax system, have never worked. We need large-scale, certainly in Dublin, large-scale high-rise developments of apartments, and we need them ASAP, and whatever the government has to do to deliver them, it should do. And certainly start off with fixing the traffic system around Dublin and getting Dublin Dublin city managers, that their job is not building swimming facilities in the Custom House docks. It is putting up 40-storey and 50-storey tower blocks of apartments. I mean, I fly to more cities around Europe, and Dublin is the only city I arrive into where we do not. Everybody wants a family home. We have huge numbers of our employees who are under the age of 30 do not want family homes. They're not looking for 4-bedroom houses with a front and back garden. They want apartments. They want apartments in the centre of town where they can enjoy their leisure time. It fixes the transport city, and this restriction, this ludicrous system we have in Dublin of being afraid to go up in one of the fastest growing capital cities of Europe is absurd. And to me, that's the obvious solution. It's not building more houses out in Kildare or Westmeath or in Wicklow or in Drogheda. We've got to go up in the centre of this town, and we've got to go up now, and the government should have a crisis team working on it.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks very much, Chair, for allowing me in. Much appreciated. Mr.
John.
O'Leary, Mr. Wilson, thanks very much. I too would like to compliment you and your company for what you've done to open up aviation travel to our country on the periphery of Western of Europe, as you've outlined. Particularly want to thank you from a personal perspective for the route that you have from Dublin to Košice in Slovakia, given that my wife is originally from that, and from a practical perspective, what it means for us is that rather than flying into Bratislava, Rzeszów or Budapest and having a 4 or 5 hour journey on the other side, we can fly in and we're with my wife's family within 30 minutes. So that's a practical example of what you've done to open up connectivity across Europe.
It does bring your mother-in-law closer.
It does bring my mother-in-law closer, of course.
Not all systems are perfect.
Exactly. I better not comment or get in trouble. If I could go back to just Waterford Airport, and I do declare an interest, given that I was a former board member of the airport from my time on the council. You did say in comments earlier on that you saw difficulties in terms of projects and the role of consultants and not engaging with end users, but I understand that you have been engaged in terms of the proposition at Waterford Airport.
Sure.
Yeah. So that engagement, I suppose, has happened, and you have said here again that you would be willing to operate a flight from Waterford Airport to London in particular.
As long as it's low cost, no question.
Exactly. So, for us, I suppose, in the southeast region, we would see that as an integral connectivity issue for us, and obviously having that connectivity to London gives the opportunities, notwithstanding what you've said in terms of the hub and spoke requirements, but that connectivity directly into London is of the utmost importance. So I do welcome the fact that if that is in place, that you will come back home, as we would say, given that you operated your first flight there in 1985. So thank you for that. If I could just ask you in relation to some of the your aircraft pieces, and whether you'll have challenges. You have a 520 aircraft, you said, growing to 670, and you mentioned that MAX aircraft, it does have additional seats. One of, I suppose, from a logistics point of view for your airline, the interchangeability of your aircraft has been a huge advantage for you. And do you see challenges in that space, given that different types of aircraft, if one has to slot into the other, it has more seats or less seats, as the case may be? Do you see that as an issue for you going forward?
Between our NGs, which are 189 seats, and the MAX, which are 197 seats, there isn't that much difference. I mean, our average load factor is about 94-95%. So if we had to switch from an NG or a MAX went tech, and we had to switch in an NG, we might have one or two passengers, but we'd reaccommodate those on the next flight.
Yeah.
The big challenge facing us now is looking at the next aircraft order. Do we go up to the MAX 10, which is about a 230-seat aircraft?
Which would be...
And that will be much more challenging if we we order, say, 200 of those aircraft, and one of those goes tech, then we will have trouble. But every airline faces those consequences.
And you're in those negotiations with Boeing, are you?
No, we're not at the moment. Sadly, Boeing's pricing is not where we feel it should be, given that they're not selling a lot of aircraft. But, we remain available to resume those negotiations with Boeing whenever they want to start talking to us again. I mean, Boeing are preoccupied trying to sort out their own production challenges at the moment and deliver the aircraft that we've already got ordered for next year.
Sure, that's a challenge across the whole aviation space. And if I could just ask you in relation to pilots and crew and general aviation crew, is it still a challenge for you in terms of pilot shortage across the board, or where do you see that looking forward in your growth projections from 38 million to 57? Obviously, you'll need significant number of additional staff, and how do you see that as a challenge? Because when businesses talk to us, one of the big issues that they raise is staff shortage.
With pilots, we would have hired 1,000 cadet pilots this year. We'll hire another 1,000 next year. They're great, well-paid jobs, multinational workforce, 90 places where they can go to work across Europe, so no difficulty on the pilot side. Cabin crew, again, it's a great entry into tourism and transport, with the 2 exceptions that I gave earlier, where the UK, because of Brexit, we just can't get the flow of people that we would have relied on in Europe and in Dublin in particular because of the accommodation. But like we were the ones that we had the core group of people anyway. We didn't let anyone go during
that was a very
crisis,
sensible.
So that got us ahead of the game on everyone else.
Sure.
And we're investing heavily. Like we've opened up a new training centre in Swords during COVID. We have 6 simulators up there. We have 8 training rooms for cabin crew, training aircraft. So we're going to put another one of those at a cost of some 50 million in the Spanish Peninsula in the next 2 years, another one probably in Poland or Central and Eastern Europe. So we are investing very heavily in. But I mean, I've heard the pilot unions love to come in here and tell you that somebody produced a report somewhere, some stage, that says there's going to be a worldwide shortage of pilots. There will never be a shortage of people who are paid typically between 150 and 200,000 a year, and who by law cannot work more than 900 hours a year, which is about 18 hours a week. There's no fear of a shortage of pilots. They are very skilled aviation professionals, but they are very well paid, and there is a long line of people who wish to join and take on that career challenge.
Thanks very much. I'll welcome the increased frequency to Slovakia there when you're.
We'll do our best.
Thank you.
Anyway, just a quick question. You made reference there that, and just the practicalities, that for Shannon and Cork to become competitive, their charges want to be materially less than the likes of Dublin. Will you just put flesh in that? So if their rates are much less, what does that bring to the thinking of Ryanair in terms of putting flights in? Is it that the model is de-risked, that you can go with less capacity? What's the thinking on that?
Well, first, and again, I don't want to mislead.
I don't know.
No, but just I've got to be careful in some of my own commentary. Shannon and Cork are already significantly more competitive than Dublin. But that is a reasonably new development both in Shannon and in Cork. And that's why Shannon and Cork are growing strongly this year, and why we're putting more aircraft in there. So I don't want in any way. Shannon and Cork are now more competitive than Dublin. They need to continue to be more competitive than Dublin. And I think environmental taxation, such as €4.50 per seat, impacts the potential growth at Shannon and Cork far more than it impacts the potential growth at Dublin, because Dublin has so many other advantages. So I don't want to convey an impression that Shannon and Cork have to do more, or that they're not competitive. They are very competitive now.
ETS tax is reformed, right? The question I suppose I want to ask is, it's our ETS role. If that's reformed and the load is spread with all airlines, in terms of your growth projections, percentage-wise, what differential do you think it will make?
I mean, I think my guesstimate, Cathaoirleach, would be that we would bring forward the 5-year growth projections to a kind of a 3-year period. The growth would be faster, and it would be faster into those regional airports. And it's something that very much some of the other islands, who have asked Ireland to join in, but to date haven't. The transport ministries of Portugal, the Canaries, the Balearics, Spain, Greece, the Greek islands, are looking also at finessing some of the environmental taxation, that maybe the capital cities would continue to pay a higher share, but that the regional, the Greek islands would pay a less share, or no share. Now, so there's lots that can be done there that would advantage competitiveness at Cork and Shannon over Dublin. And
you basically want to see a serious, we'll say, thinking on this taking place now.
We need to see an aviation policy that really focuses and worries about the fact that Ireland is an island on the periphery of Europe, and the Dutch, the Belgians and the Germans are proposing lots of taxes when they have many different ways of getting and travelling internationally.
I'm just going to briefly go back. I'm going to briefly go to Senator Harkin, Deputy O'Murrochue, and briefly to Deputy McNamara, and briefly to Deputy Matt Chan. I'm going to give 2 minutes to the 2 members and a minute each to the non-members.
First off, I don't think we've had a committee as well attended by members and non-members in a long time, and just thank you for the time you were here. As somebody who was asked to go into politics by Seamus Brennan, who I know you've made lots of references to in the past, and who was not just the person who probably I suppose back in the early days of Stansted made sure that you had a little bit of presence there and a bit of breathing space, but also was the person who took Shannon away from Dublin. And there have been people who said, oh, they should never have been taken away from. I'd like just your thoughts on Shannon being separate from DAA, as positive or negative. Just, I suppose the takeaway I have from this is that the whole fairness of the emission system has to be looked at, and we need to take on the Minister and the Minister with responsibility for aviation, that EU ATC, there's huge scope there to be more environmentally friendly in terms of EU ATC delivery. I suppose just your thoughts, competitiveness both at airport level and at country level, but particularly we know you don't want the tunnel under the taxiway. Just in terms of the biggest new markets for Ireland, for Ryanair, and just a thing we haven't really touched on, and it's just maybe for my own information, Buzz, Lauda, Malta Air, Ryanair UK, Ryanair, DAC are all, you're, Michael, the group CEO of all of them. I don't know what they're internally, are they all exactly the same aircraft and they're just paint jobs on the outside different? It's just an internal operating model really. They're all Ryanair flight codes, they're all Ryanair planes, they're all the same service. Are they the same? What's the rationale other than I suppose it keeps everybody on their toes, that they're all maybe keeping each other on their toes? I don't know.
Well, sorry, so Cork and Shannon, ultimately I think Cork and Shannon, but it's my personal view, Cork and Shannon would be better off independently owned and run. Shannon is already independently owned and run. I think Cork...
You think it's better out of DAA than in it? Yeah.
Certainly, up until recent years, the Cork being owned by the DAA has been damaging to Cork growth and ambitions, because they were charging the same charges, and the charges were set in Dublin. Dublin didn't want to lose traffic to Cork, so they told Cork you have to charge the same as Dublin, which was mad. You go back in history, Cork wouldn't necessarily have spent 200 million building a new terminal that with a capacity of exactly the same traffic as the old terminal, but I understand that there were passengers at Cork who felt that they should have a covered walkway to get to and from the aircraft in Cork, and that the government felt that was well spent money. But ultimately, generally speaking, I think Cork and Shannon would be better off. But I don't. That is not a criticism. The existing management, Cork and Shannon, are doing a great job, and they should be encouraged.
Thank you.
Why do we have separate AOCs? Partly it was because originally we had the tax regime here. This is very on flight crew. Was that all of the flight crew would be taxed here in Ireland? We couldn't then get unionised across Europe, and because all of the unions wanted all the contracts in their local countries, so we had to set up separate AOCs. Lauda Europe is slightly different because it has Airbus aircraft, so it's almost like a different airline altogether. But Malta Air, which has and Buzz in Poland, really it was a way of moving cabin crew contracts out of Ireland, out of Irish taxation, as part of our agreements with national unions, so they could all have local contracts, local taxation in each of those countries.
Okay.
You can't do that with an Irish AOC.
Just new markets, just...
Deputy Morocco, we have to go here.
Yeah, look, 150 tech jobs, I think you've offered, is it Ryanair Labs you call it? Yep. If you could just go into a bit of detail, it looks to be security research, and then the other thing was the cadetships that you were talking about. You need to have been through flight school already. Here, I'm literally looking at I suppose a roadmap for a young person that's looking for it, just a number of, you know what I mean? If you could just give me that quickly.
I mean, we have a sort of press release out there today on the jobs in Ryanair Labs. I mean, we've got 4 centres now, one in Dublin here, about 250 people up here in Airside. We've got another one in Wroclaw, about 250, Madrid, another 200, and a very small one that we're growing in Lisbon. They support the business internally, everything from iPads for the pilots, new automated tech logs, that's internal process. Externally, they work on the app, the Day of Travel app, the website, seat planning, booking engine, everything within security, that. So they are, the great thing about these jobs are that when they come in, and security as well, Security Operations Centre. The great thing about those jobs is whatever you develop today, you'll see it on the website tomorrow. If you're working in an American multinational, you're way down the food chain, and you might be doing something that you'll never heard of before, but what you work on will go live.
And we're seeing a huge flood of applicants now from we were losing it for years to the Facebooks and the Twitters and all those other. They're all looking for real jobs now.
And then the cadetship.
Yeah, cadetship. I mean, a young person, if they decide to go to flight school, throughout Europe. There are flight schools that we partner with. They do their 200 hours, some of them in Cork as well. We've got with the Atlantic Flight Academy. When they've done that, they come to Ryanair as part of a type rating. So they get type rated on the 737, and then within about 6 months of that, if they successfully pass it, but they go through that mentored program, there is they will then get a job as a first officer, and then hopefully with all the growth that's coming, they'll get one of those jobs for 150 to 200,000 as a promotion to captain within about 4 years after that.
Thanks.
And hopefully in your hometown.
1 minute, Deputy McNamara.
Mentioned earlier the relative attractiveness of Limerick and Dublin as weekend destinations, but another city that's a very attractive weekend destination is Galway. The closest airport, or the fastest airport to get to and from Galway is Shannon. It's connected by rail and with the motorway. Whose job is it to highlight that? Is it Shannon Airports, is it Galway City Council, or is it the airlines?
I mean, it is actually probably, it's Galway's. If Galway wants to attract visitors, it's up to Galway to attract them. But the way for Galway to, I mean, the vast majority of visitors to Galway, and I am an expert on the M4, are coming to Dublin and driving down the M4. The connectivity of Galway to Dublin Airport is phenomenal. If you will get to Dublin Airport faster from Galway than you will get to Knock. Shannon, Shannon, you get
faster.
Right.
If you've only got a weekend, it's an awful waste of time to spend it in the M4.
Shannon's faster, but it's a difficult pull. It is a reasonably difficult sell to persuade people to go to Shannon to spend a weekend in Galway. They will find it. They generally find it much easier. They'll come to Dublin and do a day shopping and then go do whatever they want to do. But we are happy to carry them. We'll take them to Galway either through Knock, Shannon, or Dublin. All of those options are available to them.
Thank you, Deputy Matt Shannon. 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm not a member of this committee. It's just like in terms of the committee's work, I think it would be good if you were to revisit what the lads have outlined in terms of the rebalancing of these ETSs, maybe get into AA, because they certainly won't go for it, and it needs to be interrogated, and maybe some of the economic research that you might have to underpin it, you might give it to the committee. And just, I suppose, the same in terms of the aviation policy. This is a committee that follows transport, and I think it's got the best chance of trying to generate reports on that. Just the other thing I'd say to Eddie, just to remind you, we also have the Atlantic Flight School operating in Waterford Airport, as you know, so just to keep that factored
using them in Cork and in Waterford.
Yeah, very successfully. Thanks.
With that, first of all, thank you both, Michael O'Leary and Eddie Wilson, for coming in. We've both ministers in next Wednesday. We'd ask that you'd reflect on the meeting today. If there are specific further points you wish us to bring up, because we want to be very direct. So, like, you've been very, very, I suppose, informative on the competitive, the ETS, the use of the 140 million taken in and what's received, obviously the DA with the tunnel, and more, and then the whole issue about to reform the EU ATC. We want really to progress the national aviation policy. Ryanair are a huge critical. When we were in Schiphol last week, the management told us there that Ryanair had the single largest number of flights coming in through Schiphol, I think, the day before. So you're a serious airline, and you're a huge employer, and really what we want to do as a committee is to drive aviation policy in a structured way. So we'll bring it up with the respective ministers next week. We are going to do a report on this issue, and if you want to really, you've covered really, in fairness, in your submission, but if you want to reflect and come back with just pinpoint questions for the members for next week's meeting, we'd welcome that. Sure. So, thank you. Do you wish to make any final comment, Mr. O'Leary?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we've set out the 5 policy points which we think the committee should adopt, and we would certainly encourage the committee to ask the minister to explain what's happening. How is this the ETS money being spent? Why is it not being spent on producing SAFs?
Okay.
But thank you very much to you and the committee members.
Thanks, Mr. O'Leary and Mr. Wilson. The meeting is now adjourned. The next meeting of the private session, MS Teams, next Tuesday, the 6th of December at 4 p.m. Thank you all very much.